Hello, everybody. The Tuesday, May 10th regular meeting of the Fairfield Board of Education is called to order. I'm the chair, Christine Vitale. I'm joined tonight by Ms. Jacobson, Ms. Guernsey, Mrs. Gerber, Superintendent Cummings, Mr. Asa, Mrs. Maxicanelli, Mr. Peterson, Ms. Kelly. I ask you all please rise for the pledge. Happy spring, everybody. It's nice to have a full house and see such happy faces staring back at us. Our last meeting, we had no one in the audience, it seemed, but we're going to get right to our student reports, and then we'll recognize many of those that are sitting in the audience. Who wants to go first?
I think Ludlow will go first today, as we went first in sports yesterday. Yep, we took the W today, guys. So this week and last week, our students have been very busy with AP exams, and we expect some amazing 4s and 5s for the district come July. And I was requested by the junior student government officers to relay a little message over to the Board of Education that it would be advantageous for student groups to be able to use Venmo to collect payment for prom tickets and school-sponsored activities in the future. And on the topic of prom, our seniors had prom last week, and the senior representative from Ludlow is not feeling well today, so I will be covering senior prom. They had what she described as an excellent DJ, playing all of their favorite songs, a plethora of tables filled with delicious food, a fantastic pizza truck, and a photo booth with very fun props. And overall, I'm sure it was an unforgettable night that they will cherish for years to come. And while the seniors may have enjoyed their prom this weekend, the juniors will be enjoying prom on June 3rd at the Trumbull Marriott. Now, on a more serious note, our Junior State of America Club, in combination with the Falcon Council and a host of other clubs at Ludlow, ran a variety of successful fundraisers for the situation in Ukraine, raising thousands and thousands of dollars. I believe the figure is about $15,000, including a walkathon back on April 28th. So we really commend their initiative for these honorable causes. In terms of honorable causes, our National Honor Society chapter will be having their induction ceremony on May 18th. All community members are invited to attend, and it'll be coupled with the Junior Book Awards ceremony, where we celebrate all of our juniors who have achieved excellent academic, community service, and school-related accomplishments. Our drama club also put together a very, very successful 4 shows of The Wedding Singer, their spring musical, which was enjoyed by all kinds of staff, students, and community members. And of course, yesterday, the Ward baseball team and the Ward softball team both lost to the inevitable Falcons. We truly put the victory in Wright Webster and Warner House, and I'm very proud of our students, our athletes, and our coaching staff for their work. And seeing as this is the last meeting that the student representatives will be attending as a junior, just wanted to express a congratulations to our seniors here who will be graduating, and all the very best, despite being from Ward, in their college and career endeavors in the future. Thank you, everybody. I'll pass the mic over to Lynn now.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you all are having a marvelous day on this beautiful Tuesday evening. Starting things off, the Fairfield High School Latin Club were able to join the CT State Latin and Greek Day, where they went off with more than 1,300 other Greek and Latin students and had a day full of activities, food, and academic fun. I personally talked to some of the students who participated in this event, and from what I heard, the students had an overall extremely fun time. To add on, our accounting students got an amazing opportunity to hear from 4 IRS criminal investigators who came in to speak about how they combat financial fraud using the power of accounting and law enforcement. Thank you very much, Ms. Moses, for this wonderful experience that you gave for the accounting students. Finally, students who were exploring their options for life after Ward attended the Careers in Trade and Public Safety Expo, where they got to meet with countless different companies and learn about what they do.
Hi everyone, I'm Emma Feckety and I'm a senior and student representative for Fairfield Ward High School. Our spring musical Urinetown took place this past weekend from April 29th to May 1st. Ward students that were involved in this musical practiced, performed, and displayed their tremendous amount of hard work over the past several weeks to our large audiences. Additionally, our spring concert that orchestra, choir, and band groups are participating in will be taking place on Thursday, May 19th, and guests are welcome to come and support our music program starting at 7:30. In more good news, our stock market club came in first place in the year-long 2021 to 2022 competitive season among 734 high school teams in Connecticut, and with our first place team being led by Mr. Ben Stransky. Also, Mrs. Cookso is sponsoring an event called Band Together and is taking place on May 22nd from 1 to 3 at the Assumption Church outdoor grounds to raise awareness for mental health issues. And as an added bonus, it will feature our ward band, Low Darts, which will be headlining this event.
In case y'all haven't heard, Fairfield's first select Brenda Kupchik has declared May 4th, 2022 as Joseph Grabowski Day. Joe Grabowski is a senior in Fairfield High School and an extremely good friend of mine. The town of Fairfield proudly honors and recognizes Joe Grabowski, an outstanding scholar with an impeccable character, for achieving the rank of Eagle Scout. Well done, buddy. You're a good man. Last week in Fairfield High School, the students celebrated our spring athletes in our annual spring pep rally. The pep rally is extremely energetic, and I can say it was a great success. Last week officially began our AP testing week, and our AP students are working extremely hard at anticipating great results. Good luck to all our students, and congrats on getting this far. Talking about exams, finals are coming up soon, starting on June 15th to June 20th. Underclassmen will officially begin their final schedule. Once again, good luck to everyone, and happy studying. Next week in Fairfield High School, we got another No Place for Hate activity in our Learning Commons, where students will be educated into making our school into a place of acceptance and no hate.
In athletics, our boys track team won a few days ago against Wilton, and our tennis team won against Central, and again on Thursday from Brian McMahon. Battle of the Houses is returning to Ward and will occur next Friday at the end of the day for some competitions between students, which will, of course, include our famous tug-of-war competition. Just this past Thursday, Ward held our National Honor Society induction ceremony for the junior and senior students with an amazing senior slideshow that was created by our NHS Executive Board, and a speech was given by the president of NHS, Sneha Sunder. New members of the Executive Board got inducted through the traditional candlelight ceremony as we transition into the 2022 to 2023 school year. Students anticipate our junior prom taking place this Saturday at 6:30, and our senior prom, which will be taking place on Saturday, June 4th. Senior experience begins in a short 2 weeks, and our senior class is excited to begin their several weeks of projects, internships, and later share their findings at our showcase, which will occur on June 16th. The following Tuesday will be our senior graduation on the Tetra Davis turf field, and we as a Ward community look forward to all these upcoming events. And to conclude tonight, both Lynn and I would like to sincerely thank Mr. Cavanna for having us represent the Ward student body this year, and we were and continue to be honored to represent the students of Ward. And Mr. Cummings, the Ward student community thanks and congratulates you and wishes you the best of luck on your next steps in your career. You truly led us through an incredible and unforgettable learning experience. Thank you for your time, and as always, and very proudly, go Ward.
Well done. Does anybody have any questions for our student representatives? There's so many exciting things going on. I'm really jealous. I wish I was back in high school. I mean, any questions? Well, on behalf of the board, I want to, Ms. Maxon-Kennelly.
Sorry, I believe usually at this time we also ask the seniors where they are going next year.
If any our seniors would like to share their plans for post-graduation.
Well, I'm staying home and going to Fairfield University.
And I'll be attending University of Connecticut.
Congratulations, and we wish you the best of luck as you graduate and continue on your next adventure. And you'll both be relatively close, so hopefully you'll come back and visit and be, around for consulting for our next, student representatives, because you guys have done a great job. So you're welcome to stay, also welcome to go. It sounds like you have a lot of things going on with APs and finals and plans for proms and sporting events. But thank you, and enjoy the rest of the school year. Okay, moving on to public comment. If any members of the public would like to give comment on agenda items, I invite you to come forward at this time. We'll be taking 3 minutes per comment. We will also be taking a vote prior to any action items. Would anybody like to give comment? Okay, seeing none. Moving on to recognition of excellence, Odyssey of the Mind World Qualifiers, and Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly, will you do the honors?
More than happy to. Had to dig this one out. This 2011's version here. So just
bear with the wrinkles. So I am so proud to recognize the wonderful accomplishments of the 2022 Fairfield OM teams. For those of you who don't know, I have to give the little educational plug here. Odyssey of the Mind is an international activity and competition, which actually teaches our students to be more creative as they collaborate and problem solve and take total ownership of their own work and thinking. Fairfield has been active in OM on and off for decades, but this year was especially challenging coming out of COVID. Yet we were still able to send 4 teams up to the state competition. These teams worked together for months to create their own props, mechanisms, costumes, and scripts to create a scored performance, while also honing their skills to handle a surprise, verbal or hands-on problem to solve on the day of competition. So today we celebrate 3 of our teams from Burr Elementary School, Tomlinson Middle School, and Fairfield Ward High School, who demonstrated such creative mastery and determination on the day of state competition that they earned their way to Worlds, which takes place Memorial Day weekend at Iowa State University. There, those teams who choose to go on to that next level will each be competing against teams from around the country and from as far away as Mexico, Poland, and China. So I would be remiss if I did not start by applauding the work of the volunteer coaches, without whom OM does not happen. Those coaches, Carrie Sweeney, Karen Anahore, and Suzanne Graceffa, who facilitated and encouraged the work of these young students for months, and without whom this program would not exist. And so it is with great pleasure that I introduce these three teams to you, the Fairfield Board of Education, and to the town of Fairfield. For each team, they're coming up for a photo. And any board members who would like to join in the photo, and obviously for parents. But beginning with Burr Elementary School, who scored 2nd place in their problem number 2, we have Jessica Sweeney, Julia Aaron, Luke Abbott Walker, Shrey Bendari, and with us tonight also Genevieve Mahalik. Teammate Logan Schmucker was not able to make it, but those who are here, if you could please come up and be recognized. And you always know it's OM night when you look out at the audience and don't quite understand the sartorial choices of some of the guests, but you can guess that these are parts of their costumes. So thank you, come on up. And next, from Tomlinson Middle School, the team scored in 1st place in their classics problem number 3. And I do wish them the best of luck as they travel out to Iowa. Those team members are Jack Anahori, Vaden Thacker, Anshul Sinha, Anshika Sinha, Henry Quinn, is it Carol or Carlos? Carlo, I thought I spelled it wrong. Carlo Desi and Aram Alaba. And finally, from Fairfield Ward High School, who scored second place in problem number 5, we have Ellie Davis, Mariella Graceffa, who, by the way, is punching above her weight here, moving up from 8th grade to compete against high schoolers, Natalia Graceffa, Emily Rodriguez, and Megan Sokol. So I'm very hopeful that these 3 teams might consider building on this wonderful experience for next year, and that this year will mark another rebuilding surge as we grow this amazing program through the wonderful commitment of new and experienced coaches. So again, teams, congratulations on a wonderful year.
Congratulations and good luck to those that are going forward or going to Iowa to compete in Worlds. And Mrs. Maxicanelli, thank you for your continued advocacy for this program and promotion and for working with really anyone who is interested. Okay, we're moving along. District Improvement Plan update and format review. Have a good night, everybody. All right, I will be moving out of the way.
It's going to be there. All right. Oh, no, absolutely. Faith. Good evening, everyone. Mike Cummings, Superintendent. I'm joined tonight at the presentation table with Dr. Parrish, Dr. Zavichansik, and Mr. Mancusi, who've overseen the development with much able assistance from our District Improvement Steering Committee to bring you into really the first part of the home stretch. So tonight what you're going to see is we're going to begin with a presentation of how we've since reorganized the improvement plan since you've last seen it. We're going to talk about how the structures that are going to support the plan as it goes forward. And then after the presentation, I'm going to walk you through essentially how this will present online. So what we're moving forward to for the first read, the board will have a first read at the May 25th meeting, is essentially going to be the district improvement plan will live online. There will not be a 3-ring binder to go on the shelf and collect dust. We're very with a lot of forethought. We've looked at what other districts have done and how they've created plans, and the fact that it lives online and will be interactive throughout its 5-year existence. Our intention with that is to make it more meaningful, more relevant, more timely with the work of the district. So I will going to start with a presentation, and then we'll walk through what essentially now is going to look to you like a Google workbook as we talk about the plan, and I'll talk about how that structures when we get to that piece. I want to caution you at the outset that what you're going to see tonight is still a working draft. So while you'll see some of the content, you'll also see a few places where we have work to do. I've highlighted some of that work in yellow, both on the presentation here, but in the workbook itself, because as we're running against time, we will have it ready for you as a first read on the 25th. Actually, we'll have it for you as in your board packet in a week from now. But there's some pieces we still have to complete. So from the very beginning, we've talked about the fact that the district improvement plan is essentially and all about fulfilling the mission of the Fairfield Public Schools. The district improvement plan begins with the mission. It includes the vision of the graduate, and these tasks from the Board of Education, these expectations from the Board of Education, the core values. When we first presented the plan to you, we gave you a sense of 4 buckets or 4 goals that the plan would include. As we've worked on the plan, we've revised our thinking with the idea that we've essentially narrowed, and that 4th goal was communication. We've pulled that out, and we'll show you how that exists now in the plan. But essentially, these are the 3 goals of the district improvement plan. It's the way we've structured it going forward is to make sure that what's presented to everybody who looks at it, but is integral to the work of the district, is that these 3 goals exist together. What we were conscious of as we developed the framework and the vision that you're going to look at tonight is that as much as possible, we didn't want to have these goals separate out on a spreadsheet. The work on the social emotional work, the equity work in the district, they are work to support the academic achievement of the district. So as you'll see in some of the work steps going forward, the SEL and the DEI work is integrated into the curricular work, the budget work, the professional learning work that's going to take place in the district over the next 5 years. The 3 goals are intertwined. They exist, they mutually exist. Key performance indicators. So these are the items, and we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to the workbook presentation. But these are the key indicators, key performance indicators that are going to drive the improvement plan forward. You see, I've highlighted a couple where we're working on developing the language for those goals. But these are the goals. You saw versions of these earlier in the first draft that we shared with you, or the first iteration of the plan that we shared with you. We'll talk about how this is going to be monitored when we get to the workbook. Now, we've got these 6 strategic initiatives. And as we wrestled with the problem of how to present the 4 goals and then the 3 goals, we thought about how the metaphor I keep falling back to this is if you think about the weaving of a cloth, right? You've got strands of cloth that run vertically, and you have strands of cloth that run horizontally. And those strands intersecting creates the strength of the cloth. The strategic initiatives extend across the goal areas. And we'll talk about how we break that out in the presentation. But these are the 6 core areas of work. The communications goal that had existed now falls under the last strategic initiative. That's where we've kind of nested it in the community piece. And we break that out further on each of these slides, providing definitions. So if you go back, excuse me one second. If you go back to that the first indicator, there's first initiative, you'll see then on this slide, we've broken out definitions of what each of those 4 areas or 4 bullets are. And we do it for each of the strategic initiatives. And these are the themes of the initiatives that are going to run through the plan itself and provide structure and commonality to the work over the 5 years. We presented this to some of the administrators this afternoon, and one of the comments that was given to us, it was a great idea, is that we need to supplement the plan as it goes forward with some type of glossary or dictionary of some of these terms. Some of that definition is provided on these slides, but there are other pieces that we're going to have to, there's language within each of these that may require some further definition. I'm going to just point out the first bullet there. Many of you are familiar with the term SRBI as an intervention strategy. That term is now evolving at the state level to a multi-tiered support system, and that's really the current term, and that's the term we're adopting for use in this district improvement plan and in the work of the district. And this is where you can see the communications piece. So let's talk about one of the critical pieces of the plan going forward. The governance process that's going to be in place to make sure that the plan stays on track, and the commitments that the district will make to present both to the board 3 times a year to talk about updates on the plan, as well as how the plan itself will be integrated into the school improvement plans and the administrator and teacher individual goals. One of the things that did not work in the first 5-year plan was the monitoring of the plan and the adjustments that were made in accordance with changes in that as issues came up and interfered essentially with some of the timing of the plan. And I'm going to give you an example of that in a second. I'll give you an example of right now one of the things that we face. But one of the things we have to look at as we think about this is how do we monitor the work? And going back to those key performance indicators, for example, we have individual yearly benchmarks set up for each of those to monitor our progress towards achieving of the district improvement plan goals. If we're not making that progress, we need to look at why not, and then make changes in strategy. Not change the vision, not change the goal, but change the plan to get to that goal. There are things that, we all know this, there are things that we control, and there are things we do not control. And this is really designed for both of those ideas, those concerns. So I'll give you an example of something we don't control. Right now, the state is looking to change the way, and Mr. Mancusi can speak to this with more knowledge than I can, but we currently use a system called IEP Direct to monitor IEPs, special education students on an IEP. It's essentially the housing of the information related to the IEP. It guides the special education process. It guides the PPT process. Our staff, our regular ed teachers, have access to through IEP Direct. Actually, through the integration of IEP Direct to Infinite Campus, our staff can see the IEPs of the students that they teach. They can identify the modifications and accommodations that those students need. Each district, IEP Direct is very common in district use throughout the state, but it is not prevalent. It's not common in all districts. The state is adopting a different system called SEDS or SEDS. They are asking everybody to implement this this next fall. It doesn't integrate with Infinite Campus. It's still coming out of the box, as it were. Our staff have not really been able to have any training in it. So when you think about the level and for a year, these two systems are going to coexist as we transition the materials from IEP Direct to the said system. Mr. McCusi, am I getting this right so far? Okay, good. So I pay attention when you talk, Mr. McCusi. So one of the things that we have is we think about two types of budgets, right? We think about monetary budget, but we also think about the time budget and the Tuesday afternoons, the early release days, the full days of professional development that are in the calendar that the board adopts. When we think about the budgeting of time, these are the types of things that can interfere with the best planning in the world. There is some hope. I don't know how bright a hope it is, but there is some hope that the state will delay the implementation a year. The timing of this, particularly coming out of COVID and everything else that people have gone through, is particularly bad. But people are really, and not just Fairfield, I think that there's a common feeling around the state that people are not ready for this change. And for all of us, every district, it interferes with the other work that we need to do. So these are the type of things that we have to keep you informed of as we go forward, and we have to keep our staff informed of, and we're going to have to potentially make changes in the timeline of our initiatives as we adjust to these. And I think we all, if you've been involved with public school work in Connecticut for any length of time, you could probably all cite individual examples, some big, some small, of things that the state has done or other things have come along and changes in legislation that have impacted our ability to use our time to what we really would like to spend that time on. And that's not to say that what the state is saying is we wouldn't necessarily support, but when we often talk about state mandates and their monetary impact, we don't often talk about their time impact on staff. So this is just this is the most relevant or current example of one of the concerns that we put out there. But here is essentially the governance process. We were proposing that a district improvement steering committee continue to move forward over the next few years to guide the improvement process, that it consists as it does now of administrators, teachers, and parents, community members. We want to look at how we can make sure that the process stays relevant so that people can propose changes in strategy to the governance process, and the district improvement steering committee would essentially work to identify if any of those ideas should go forward, how they would go forward, how they would fit into the district improvement plan, what would necessarily then have to come out. As I've shared with you before, one of the steering committee's initial concerns and consistent concerns has been that a district improvement plan that is overstuffed with initiatives will achieve very little, and we have to be very selective in what we work on, because again, time and dollars are always a factor. So so we believe that there should be an iterative process in the district improvement plan, and it should not just be controlled by central office administrators about what's working and what's not working. But the other piece that I mentioned briefly, and I want to highlight, is that as we go forward, and we'll be working with our administrators through the end of this year, because on May 31st, on that professional development day, our school-based staff will be working on reviewing the current school improvement plan in order to prepare for the 22-23 school improvement plan. We want to make sure that the goals in the district improvement plan integrate thoroughly and fully into the next iteration of the school improvement plans. And off the school improvement plans, the school improvement plan essentially becomes the building administration's goals, individual goals for the school year. And out of that, there would be then selected the relevant teacher goals for their goals over the next school year too. So there should be this vertical connection from the DIP to the SIP to the individual goals, and then back up. And in that way, we ensure that everybody's moving forward together. So with that said, before I turn to the workbook, I don't know if there's any questions you would like to ask, and we can hopefully answer.
Does anybody have any questions? Do you want to take now, or do you want to wait?
I can wait. I'm good either way.
Okay.
Just going to move and I'm going to use the computer to move the tabs. So what you're looking at now is essentially a Google workbook, right? And this was not how the plan will present online. Each of these tabs will be links online, and people can then click down through the links to get to the relevant information. So there'll be and when you get this as a first read, you're going to see it. Essentially, you're going to get a URL that you'll be able to work then your way through. And again, the reason we're doing this is because we want to make sure that this is timely, that we can make changes on it essentially as things are happening and keep it living for the staff and for the community. You want to just go, you can just start clicking through that. So again, we've got the mission. Yeah, you can just go down along them in order. There you go. Now, here are the goals. And if you could, Zakia, if you can scroll down on that a bit. So what you're going to see, in the information, but you'll see this in 4 categories: the complete, continuous in process, and future work. And then you'll also see this timeline bar at the bottom. And if you can continue down, then you'll see each strategic initiative. So this is an overview page. And what you'll be able to do when you get to the strategic initiative page is then you'll be able to, each of these will be linked. Goals, or if you go to the KPI. So as I spoke about earlier, here on the left are the goals that I shared with you earlier, or excuse me, the KPIs, the key performance indicators. And then as you go across to the right, you'll see we're going to populate that with the expectations for student performance over those 5 years. So those, when you get the plan, those will be in place. And we'll be able to measure our progress towards those percentages in real time. Next. Yeah, I think that's right, Dr. Savage, right? We're working off this year's baseline. Go ahead.
We use the last performance that came out. So 2021, it would have been like Smarter Balance that came out last summer as the baseline to begin figuring out where the goals will go. So I guess last year is the correct answer, although the data came out this year.
So that would mean then that the first column of data will be it'll be a touch point, but it won't be a result of the district improvement plan.
That'd be accurate, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Again, an overview link will connect to each of these. And again, as we move forward with this, the idea is that the bar graph will move forward in real time as we make progress against the district improvement plan goals. Excuse me, the strategic initiatives. And then there's a tab for each of these strategic initiatives. So here's the academics tab. And as you go down, you'll see, keep going, I'll tell you when to, I know it jumps. Stop there. So you can see like where I've highlighted here is something that we have to go back to as a team and start to think about where the budget is. So you'll see the one below it, I've started to put in a budget because that one I was able to calculate, but I'm not sure because we have to talk to the relevant curriculum or program director what they're thinking about staff work for those types of things. And you'll see as you go down that yellow box is going to show up on anything right now that's in budget need. There's some explanation there, but not necessarily the dollars. And one of the commitments we made to you 3 years ago was that in the next district improvement plan, when you look at it, you'll have a good sense of what dollars are going to be entailed in what you're approving. And again, as we started to do this year, the district improvement plan in the fall, and it's very easy for me to say all these things, right? Like this is what you should do. But in the fall, what you'd want to be able to do is use the district improvement plan to get that early indication of where budget's going to be. At least some of the budget needs are going to be, particularly around, I think, professional development and potentially also materials. But that would be really, again, the idea that the DIP should be driving the budget to fulfill the mission of the district. You can go to the next tab. And you'll see this, and again, here's the SEL and equity goal, very similar approach as we go forward. There are certain items that we say are going to continue. They're just going to happen year after year after year because they're going to be, you know, we have new staff. We have such a large staff that we're going to have to continue that work. Budget need there. You could go to the professional development one. Maybe we can stop there. And this tab in particular supports. This is professional development is really one of the most important. I don't want to rank strategies in terms of importance, but the commitment, the ongoing commitment, and the awareness of how much time we actually have to work with staff and really embed the work is going to be critical to the success of the district improvement plan. Too often, improvement efforts fall short because professional development, either through dollars or time or both, lags. And so we have an expectation on staff that they're going to be doing something, but we haven't properly trained staff to do that work. And I think we've all learned over the years that a 3-hour workshop on an idea is not going to lead to sustainability or capacity building. That an idea or a strategy or a skill that we want to build in staff needs continuous work, needs to be continually built, needs to be extended. And so simply lining up a list of professional development needs and checking them off on the calendar leads to scattershot work. And it doesn't lead to the deep embedding of the improvement that a school system needs. Maybe just go to, yep. And there again, there is some overlap. You'll see that there are strategies on more than one of these tabs. There'll be on more than one of the links as you follow it. But that is because, again, we're looking to make sure that ideas carry forward, you know, and that there's interconnection among the strategies and the goals going forward with the staff for our work. And when the way this will work is when online, it actually works now in the spreadsheet, as I found out today when I made a mistake, that when you change one of these, if they're connected in the workbook, if you change one here, it might change on another page. So that will also happen online. So if you see an initiative in one strategic initiative, you see one action step there. If it's in others, when you make the change in one, it'll change in the others because, again, it's relevant work to all those. I think that's probably it. Maybe just hit the community one, if you don't mind. Again, this includes the communication piece, the reaching out to stakeholders, those three pieces that need to take the district improvement plan and bring it back out into the community, collect community input, and bring it back to the DIP. Okay, thank you. I think that's, so I don't know, while this is up, if we want to start questions and.
Mr. Peterson, I'm going to stay over here. Just, Mike, this way you can use the screen if you need to.
Really just a technical question. I think I get what you're doing with the Google format here, and I appreciate it. I'm excited to see what it looks like when it's done. One thing that I would be a little concerned about with this format, and again, I get what you're doing with this dynamic living document, is that there needs to be an anchor and there needs to be a change log. We need to know what we've approved at the beginning of the process, and any time that anything is changed thereafter, I think needs to be logged, both for our, reference and for the public. I know this is something we talked about briefly when we were reformatting the waterfall for the same reason. It's a large, complicated plan, and if you change, one of those KPIs, that would be a meaningful change versus what, you know, the original intention was. So I would just, as a formatting hint, I guess I would look for something like that.
We can certainly include that.
Mrs. Maxon Cannelli.
Thank you. And I echo Mr. Peterson's, that was the first thing I wrote, that if there are any changes, if there can be a way to note it with dates. And again, it avoids the, am I crazy, but didn't I remember blank, you know, kind of thing. It was very helpful. Regarding the goals, one thing I thought we had talked about was, or that you had been considering, was the idea of adding a facility goal. And I was wondering what happened with that.
I do think that there should be a facility goal, but I really believe that's the province of the board to, and if the board decides to include that in the district improvement plan, we can certainly do that. But given the ramifications of facilities, I think that that's something that the board really has to own, because if we think about the waterfall as facilities, that's one thing. But if we think about facilities in a broader sense, then there certainly is going to have to be board involvement and decisions around that. And I'd be very hesitant myself or anybody else to start to put a timeline together for that.
Okay, thank you.
And follow up on that. And part of the reason why we moved forward with the facilities committee is that we saw the need for a long-term plan for our facilities, and being that it is the work of the board, thought that the work would begin at the committee level and bring it forward, and hopefully over the next year have a more definitive goal for the district improvement plan. And also with the work that's being done at the town level, working to have a 5-year capital plan. I think our facilities plan potentially could be interwoven with the town. So it's somewhat of a work in progress right now, which is why it's not moving forward as part of this presentation.
Okay, thank you. And it's not that I thought it was falling off anybody's radar, but we had brought it up before, so I just wanted to circle back to it. I did not know that about SRBI being replaced as a term, so lots of people's business cards are getting changed now too. And
I didn't know till a week ago.
yeah, okay, so it flabbergasts me what somebody feels the need to spend time on. But one other question I had with the, we had talked about community engagement and bringing this out. And again, I know we're a little bit behind on that. For me, that's for completely understandable reasons with everything that we're working through this year. But do you see this as being ready for a board vote in June? And I ask that sincerely because I don't see how we can, or maybe I'm not understanding what you had been envisioning for community engagement beyond the steering committee.
I had been hopeful that we would be able to bring this out as a draft to other stakeholders in the community. We've really run out of time with that.
Yeah.
I think that, and I looked at this two ways. One, you know this already, but the most important stakeholder in this conversation is the board itself. So I think that working with the board to gain your approval, then I think it can be brought out as a complete document to other members of the community. I think it reflects certainly the steering committee's work. We've really done, since the steering committee has been together, we has been really thinking about format more than the action steps, more than the goals. So that's really been the work, and the next step would be bring it back to the next work for us is to bring it back to the steering committee for final input and ideas as we bring it back to the board. But I do think that it deserves a greater airing and awareness, particularly because it is going to have impact on the work of the district and what the district priorities are, and certainly for a lot of people in town, impact on the budget. I don't think it has just looking at the action steps right now, I don't think it has a major impact on budget. I don't think that you're going to see drastic increases in funding because of this request. As I said, I think we're being very mindful of the fact that as much professional development as we believe we need, we're also limited by time during the school year and availability of staff during the summer. So we currently we might see an increase in that budget line, but as you look at some of the other key indicators, for example, trying to reduce our prevalence rate among special ed students and subgroups, we're also hoping that there'll also be some cost savings that come with this as we improve our system, the MTSS system, as we improve our responsiveness to student needs. While that's not put forward as a dollar figure goal or a key performance indicator, there are key performance indicators that that would help drive down some of those costs that right now are major cost factors in our increasing budget.
Okay, thank you. And then one other issue I had was the idea that if there are changes going forward, that it's not coming back to the board. And so I was wondering if you could explain that rationale. And I get the need to be nimble, but we do meet a decent amount.
No, I didn't explain myself well. There's I left out a key piece of information. There's 3 planned board presentations, October, December, and in May. That would be October, thinking of October as what took place over the summer. December would be kind of a mid-year. We'd be looking at a mid-year. And we're tying this, by the way, to our planned timeline for meeting with the schools on their improvement plans. So as we've started to do this year, that work, going back to the idea of how the iterative cycle, as we meet with the schools on their improvement plans, what are they identifying as working, not working, should then therefore be reflected in the DIP, right? So as we think about October, December, May, the idea would be that we bring those ideas back to the board at those meetings for discussion. So it would not be done without the board's information, and if the board decides consent. Again, I can't stress enough that you know I've been saying this for a long time, that I think the board's involvement in this work and their connectedness to this is critical to the success of the plan. And unlike the first 5-year plan, which for a lot of reasons fell off the radar, this plan should not, and it should sustain changes in leadership at any level.
And just to Mrs. Vitale, and I'm sure you're planning on it, but I feel the need to say it anyway, is that I hope we have a significant chunk of time at our next meeting, because obviously we have a lot of reading to do here and to give feedback to staff on. So just wanted to put that out there. Thank you, Mr. Cummings.
Yeah, you're welcome. And since you gave me the opportunity, I want to just, in advance of you looking at the full plan, one of the questions I would give to the board is, given that it is an iterative process, that you'll see in certain strategic initiatives that the next 5 years are in pretty good detail, and in others less so. And that's very deliberately done because we can look with some confidence a year, maybe 2 ahead, but we didn't want to spend a lot of time and effort figuring out year 4 or 5 because we want it to be more flexible, if that makes sense. So we definitely would want the board's input on those first couple of years, but you'll see, as I said, the language will be broader for years 3, 4, and 5 in some of the initiatives.
So it isn't like which I wouldn't have had a problem with. There isn't like a blank, goal to be created or strategy to be determined in summer 2023 kind of thing. So is there actual placeholder language, or simply that it gets vague?
It gets more, well, I don't know if I would say the word vague. I think that part of the issue is, if you think about the SEL and equity work, if we're going to rightfully integrate that into the academic work, then as the academic work goes forward, the planners of the academic work, and I'll take curriculum revision as probably the most prevalent, right? But any really professional development, that as the curriculum is being revised, that we build into the curriculum documents opportunities and for the SEL and equity work to be visible. So that's going to be critical to us as we go forward. And I think so that work is more defined. The SEL and equity work, it may simply say, build this into the curriculums as they go forward. Does that make sense? And that would be the ongoing professional learning the professional learning for that would be integrated into the curriculum work as much as possible. Yeah.
Any other questions? Ms. Jacobson.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, and I'm looking very much forward to diving into it. I just have 4 quick areas that I wanted to talk about, and I'm sorry I couldn't read it so quickly to know the answers to some of these ahead of time. But the targets, is that all student based only, or are we breaking down each of those targets by subgroup population? There'll be unique targets for all, and then unique targets for the state areas that we get reported on.
You want to, Dr. Zavacinski, you speak to that?
So the goal is written broadly for all students, and then the subgroup populations. The background document, the appendix, does have the individual subgroups listed. For example, the first one, subgroups in a positive direction, disproportionality, has all of the ethnic subgroups that get reported as well.
Well, there will be targets for each of those subgroups based on this last year's data that are quantified.
In order to get to that number, the subgroups would have to improve, although we haven't written them all because there's 5 or 6 individual groups underneath each of the goals.
Okay, so in the draft, will that be in there?
The actual numbers, as an appendix, I have them. They don't appear in the actual goal, though.
Understood. Okay. School improvement plans. Are those also, again, similar idea to meet the top? Everyone has to feed in, right? So are the SIPs going to also be in this format?
Yes, the SIPs will not be in this format. Dr. Zavacinski's in the process of revising the format for the SIPs. The change in the SIPs will be using the data in this to drive their plan forward. The SIP goals will be SMART goals. There'll be 3 SMART goals. We're looking right now for the first year anyway. Not to say that this would not follow in years to come, but a literacy goal, a numeracy goal, and an attendance goal. Those would be the 3 goals that we'd be working on essentially for 22-23. They will be SMART goals based on the school's current level of performance in the relevant assessment area, whether it's SBA, STAR, PSAT, SAT.
So I assume that this was all mapped out from end goal back, that you know exactly what everyone needs to do in order to achieve what's here. Theoretically.
At the district level, yes.
I appreciate, the contemplation of the budgetary item column. And I know you said you're not quantifying the potential offset. And I'm sorry, again, I couldn't read it as quickly. But in that column, along with the budget, calculation, could there be a commentary about how it may be an offset without necessarily the number? So we anticipate that this would reduce X, not necessarily by an amount, but you know what I'm saying? So you are putting an amount in here of what something might cost, but you're also anticipating how that might help reduce another area, but not necessarily with the number.
Yes, it does. I think that we have to think about, I have to think of the language for that, but I absolutely believe that the district improvement plan, an outcome of a stronger academic performance across the district at all levels would involve, to make that happen, you have to, one of those levels has got to be the performance currently of special education students, identified students, but also if we think about, just let's take the grade 2 reading goal. If we're able to get all grade 2 students, more and more of them every year reading at grade level by the end of the year, one of the greatest contributors to later special education identification is students' struggles to read. If we can begin to reduce that number, I think it's fair to say that we're going to see a corresponding decrease in the prevalency rate. So we can think about a language that would address that expectation.
And obviously not all expenses would necessarily have that. Like sometimes it's just you're buying materials and that's what it is,
Right.
But where it obviously is contemplated to be of such, and it makes sense. And then the last thing I'll bring up for tonight, I also had wrote down the facility issue. And I didn't in my mind contemplate that being related necessarily to the waterfall, but just our obviously everyday concern of safety and cleanliness and maintenance and, aspirational in terms of have to do and maintaining that and maintenance. But I mean, so I think that at some point I'll probably give feedback on that. But even without a goal per se that's built out as it may be contemplated right now that ties to the waterfall, I think we would, for me, I'd need to have something in here that expresses our commitment to our spaces. So that's just my last thought on that.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, we're moving on to old business. Approval of Fairfield Cares invitation for Fairfield Public Schools high school students to participate in discussion groups. Recommend a motion. The Board of Education approve Fairfield Cares invitation for FPS high school students to participate in discussion groups. Can I have a motion? Ms. Guernsey, a second. Mrs. Gerber, take it to the board for any discussion, questions? Mrs. Maxinelli.
I'm just going to follow up. I'm not sure to whom I'm directing this. I thought that was you. I didn't want to, I wasn't positive.
I didn't want to assume that I should just walk up.
Ms. Houslett, if you can just introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Kathy Hazlett. I'm the program director of Fairfield Cares Community Coalition. Happy to answer your questions about the focus groups.
Yeah, so again, I was, enthusiastic. I think the more kind of conversations like this we get, the better we can direct and not be trying to think we know what's best for kids without actually asking them. But I'm just going to follow up on my one point, and that was regarding social media. If that was something you had a chance to talk to anybody else about, or if you see that it'll be something that can be interjected here.
I spoke to my evaluator who designed the questions and told her that we would like to include social media, the impact of social media on substance use. So yes, it will be included.
And so I will enthusiastically be supporting this. So thank you so much for following up on that. I really appreciate it.
You are so very welcome.
And then I only had one other follow-up, and I apologize if we were told this before and I forget. What would be the timeline for us hearing about any conclusions, or does this simply form the next Fairfield Cares plan, or?
Yeah, so because we're getting a late start, we're hoping to do maybe 2 focus groups before the end of this, end of the school year or end of June, and continue on in the fall. So I would say early 2023, we could report back.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, we will take it to the public. Any public comment on this item? Seeing none, back to the board for a vote. All in favor? Ms. Jacobson, Ms. Guernsey, Mrs. Gerber, Mrs. Vitale, Mr. Asa, Ms. Maxinelli, Mr. Peterson, Ms. Kelly. Motion carries 8-0.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to new business, approval of the paraprofessionals collective bargaining agreement. That the Board of Education, the recommended motion is the Board of Education approve the collective bargaining agreement between the Fairfield Board of Education and the paraprofessionals CSEA, SEIU, Local 2001 CTW for the period July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2024. Ms. Jacobson, can I have a second? Mrs. Gerber, we don't typically have in-depth discussions on our collective bargaining agreements, but Ms. Jacobson represented the board. So I thank you for your service in this. And do you recommend the board, any recommendations on this before the board takes action?
I recommend that you support the contract. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobson.
Didn't we talk about changing paraprofessionals to paraeducators? I don't know if it needs to be reflected in. I don't know.
It says paraprofessionals. I think that in the contract that, but I do think that that is a very good point just to bring up as a discussion point. It does say paraprofessionals, and that is the way that we have been referring to these educators in the past. Moving forward in the new contract, if approval will reflect this, that they will be rightly referred to as paraeducators. So thank you, Ms. Kelly, for bringing that forward, and it's a good opportunity just to notify the public that that will be the language moving forward. So we will take it. Any public comment on this motion before we take no public comment? Thank you, Mrs. Gerber. No public comment. This is a personnel matter, and so we'll take it to the board for a vote. All in favor? Ms. Jacobson, Ms. Guernsey, Mrs. Gerber, Mrs. Vitale, Mr. Asa, Ms. Maxon Kennelly, Mr. Peterson, Ms. Kelly. Motion carries 8. Thank you again for your service on this. We're very excited to get this wrapped up. Okay, moving along. Appointment of the Superintendent Search Committee. That the Board of Education be appointed as a search committee for the purpose of conducting a superintendent search. Ms. Jacobson, can I have a second? Mrs. Maxon Kennelly. Really, the only discussion on this, as everybody knows, we will have a retiring superintendent, and we will be conducting a superintendent search in the coming months. The Board of Education, if this approves, will serve as a search committee. Any meetings that are held to conduct the superintendent search will not be considered public meetings. They will be outside of the FOI requirements that usually the board needs to follow, specific to the interviewing and search of the new superintendent. So can I, any questions about this from the board? Pretty straightforward. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, take to the board for a vote. All in favor? Ms. Jacobson, Ms. Guernsey, Mrs. Gerber, Mrs. Vitale, Mr. Asa, Ms. Maxon Kennelly, Mr. Peterson, Ms. Kelly. Motion carries 8-0. Appointment of the superintendent search firm. That the Board of Education appoint CES as a search firm to assist in hiring a new superintendent of schools and authorize the board chair to negotiate a contract based on the response to the RFP dated April 4th, 2022. Can I have a motion? Mr. Peterson, seconded by Mr. Asa. Any discussion? Any comment by the public? Seeing none, back to the board for a vote. All in favor? Motion carries 8-0. Approval of contract for interim superintendent. That the Board of Education approve the interim superintendent of schools employment contract effective July 1st, 2022. Jacobson puts it on the table, seconded by Ms. Guernsey. Again, personnel matter, not much public discussion on this. If approved, we will be appointing the new interim superintendent. Any comment?
The fact that there might be appearance or payment prior to July 1st, does that matter for the contract date?
Mr. Asa.
Yeah, that was covered in the language of the contract. It does cover any work prior to July 1st on an hourly basis, and it is broken down and specific in there. It's a good question.
Yes.
Because I asked it too.
Well, and just for Mr. Cummings will still be the superintendent up until the end of June. But in terms of the contract for interim superintendent of schools. So any other questions? Take to the board for vote. All in favor? Ms. Jacobson, Ms. Guernsey, Mrs. Gerber, Mrs. Vitale, Mr. Asa, Ms. Maxon Kennelly, Mr. Peterson, Ms. Kelly. Motion carries 8-0. For the public, the board has reviewed this contract, and we are happy to announce that Dr. Tracy will once again be joining us as the interim superintendent of schools while the board conducts its superintendent search. And as stated in the motion, his first day will be July 1st, 2022. We're very excited to welcome Dr. Tracy back just for his knowledge of the district and existing relationships and familiarity with the work of the district. So the plan right now is to have Dr. Tracy come to an upcoming board meeting. So there will be some opportunity for Mr. Cummings and Dr. Tracy to meet, discuss the priorities of the district, get an overview of the district improvement plan, meet with staff and community stakeholders, and be ready to dive in July 1st. Okay, moving on, quarterly budget report, Ms. Laborious.
Good evening, Courtney Laborious, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services. It's my pleasure to present to you the Q3 budget projected results. I'll zoom out first to the big picture. We have a projected balance of about $432,000 as of the third quarter. Let me open up, I apologize. My document. So first I'm going to zoom out to the big picture. So that's the $432,000 current projected balance. The top is as you recall, the summary of the quarterly projected balances and how we manage resources. So we remain within budget. The bottom is the Munis generated report for the unencumbered balance for the year to date. The top lets us know what has changed, and the bottom is the cumulative spending. We always compare the cumulative spending to the previous 5 years, so we are able to find any anomalies in any budget structure. So the percent year-to-date spent is looked at the total amount relative to the budget. And then we drill down if there's any anomalies that we see. So that's why we show that. Also, for your information, we attached the Munis generated report with the detail of the budget expenditure and encumbrance information for year to date, and that's as of 4/29/2022. So the big picture, we have a projected gap in pupil personnel services, as we've been talking to you about, and I'm on, I don't know what page it is of your board packet, but it's this document with a top and bottom summary. So for Q3, you can see the pupil personnel, it's net negative 2.5. If you turn to the next page, there's a little bit more detail, which I will go through, but first I just wanted to talk through the big picture. It's mainly due to tuitions and professional expenses and consultations, which means that we needed to take measures to offset the gap or identify what's happening to offset the gap. So the first question, why the gap of 2.6 million? Again, it's due to tuition and settlement costs that were higher than budgeted, as well as professional consultations and professional expenses. The offsetting revenues are settled for a total of 4.5 million and are reflected in this projection. It includes, the revenues include the ARP funds that we utilized this year to offset tuition, excess cost, which has been finalized, the OTT tuition, and our anticipated Medicaid, for which we set up a receivable if we haven't yet received, because we have a good estimate of what we expect to receive. So what are we doing to cover the gap? We have about 2.4 million in projected personnel and benefit savings, of which 1.4 million is in personnel. Overall, we had $1 million this year in just retiree savings alone, and that's about $600,000 more than budgeted. This year, we saw an unprecedented and also unanticipated number of our staff retiring, as well as what we'll get to in the budget for next year, as we talk about the budget projections for next year. After we go through this year, there's a higher than anticipated number of retirements for next year as well. In addition, it's made up with insurances associated with the positions that are also not being filled. So the notable changes that happened from Q2 to Q3, as I explained earlier, there's some transportation savings that we anticipate in pupil personnel to offset the cost to a decrease in buses, still accounting for the increase in fuel. In school expenses, we had minor savings this year in copier services. In maintenance and operations, we expect to spend the full balance of the maintenance accounts with the exception of the technology training, transportation, as I mentioned, and the utilities. We'll continue to refine these estimates in real time and update the Finance Committee to get a true sense of the balances, particularly in the utilities, which, you know, we only have the experience up through March as of this Q3 projection. I will pause there. I did receive questions from board members, and so if you want to ask them here, I'm prepared to answer them in addition to any additional questions as I pause about this results, the projected results.
Ms. Kelly, I know that you forwarded questions, so why don't we start with that?
Thank you. But I could look up my email, but I think it came mostly from my notes here. But the first one was, what is the assumption that we're using about vacancies? That projecting for the rest of the year, and then what went into next year's budget as well.
Sure, thank you. So the current stat, we estimate the cost of vacancies and FMLA also, which isn't a vacancy, but it's the temporarily vacant position that is backfilled by a substitute if it's for a teacher and may or may not be paid. So we based it on the real-time hiring information. So as of Q3, we estimated the cost of vacancies for 3 teachers, 8 paraprofessionals, and 4 custodial staff. And the fill is prorated based on the anticipated start date of that backfill. So those staff, we did anticipate hiring at that time. And again, there's an assumption about the start date. So if it were on the first day of the quarter, it would be for the full quarter. If it were 4 weeks in, then it would be adjusted and prorated.
Can I ask about that? So since you're doing that specifically on certain positions, I guess I'm just trying to get a feel of, do you just assume everybody's starting the first day of that quarter? Do you say it's going to take us 4 weeks to fill every spot? Like, what? I'm just trying to look to see if there's a consistency in the.
Yeah, there's, you know, it's a little bit of a science because the person that does it looks at all the vacancies and then works with the human resource department to see where we are in recruitment. So it's not like we just apply an assumption across the base. Usually with teachers, they apply an assumption, but hard to fill positions. She'll go back to her human resource colleague and find out where they are in the hiring process and adjust that start date based on their best estimate at that time. But because there's not, however, with the paraprofessionals, the assumption was that we would be able to bring them all on board in 2 weeks. So that didn't happen.
Right. And is that the assumption that we're making, that we're going to start next year with 100% filled paraprofessionals?
The paraprofessionals, no. It's a little bit of an exception with the paraprofessionals, but so for next year's budget, what we did is took the point in time when we presented the budget to the Board of Education, which would have been around January, mid to late January, froze the active staff then, and then looked at the vacancies at that point in time. However, the paraprofessionals was an exception. They were frozen with an assumption about the current active staff plus what, in consultation with the special ed department and with the human resource director at the time, we anticipated we could hire for next year. So there was a vacancy, but it wasn't the full need. It was adjusted a little bit downward because we did fund the contract, because this year we had to hire paraprofessionals from the contracted services and special ed to make up for that gap. So there was a little bit of play between those two. And I could share more detail on that if you like. So I can show you who was active, what the number of active staff, and what the assumption is in the budget versus what the full need would be. I'm happy to get that to you in the Friday.
That much detail. I'm just trying to wrap my head around, are we anticipating more paraprofessionals than we can feasibly get in the door, seeing it? If past is prologue, which hopefully it's not, but it does seem that that's the way things are going. And if we are over budgeting for positions that we know we're not going to fill. We want to fill, but most likely can't.
So we didn't budget for the full universe. We didn't budget for the exact active. So it's somewhere that's more realistically in between that we think we'll be able to manage and that we need for next year. We can certainly keep the board apprised, of our progress on that. And for the rest of the budget, it was, like I said, frozen the active in time. Then we take the contracts that are settled and apply them. The contracts that are unsettled, we put in the wage benefit reserve and shift them over to the salary accounts as they get settled. And then make an assumption about the vacant positions at that time that we'll need for the next year. At the time, I believe it was 15 vacancies at that January time total. I can get you that exact number. And then we adjust for any budget-related adjustments. So in this case, at the point of the BOE adopted budget, it was a plus 0.5 head count. So there were some reductions related to the demographic adjustments based on the demographer's report. For sections in the elementary school, for example, offset by some increases, the adjustments to the middle school, et cetera, from the budget book. So we apply those and then we roll them forward in the budget to the next phase. So right now we're at the RTM approved phase with those assumptions.
Go ahead, Ms. Kelly. Yep.
Then I also had asked about the, in the pupil personnel expenses, the 4 major drivers you listed were outplacements, settlements, nursing, and evaluations. And I didn't know if you had, I think it would just be helpful to see a breakdown of what those numbers.
Sure, and I can include that.
Mr. Mancusi's coming up.
And we can include that in the Friday packet. I'll just explain briefly the numbers, and then Mr. Mancusi is going to explain the rationale. So tuition, which includes settlements and outplacements, is a negative 2.1 million. The budget assumes 75 outplacements and 49 settlements. And as of March, we had 77 outplacements and 1.3 million over in our projected budget, 63 settlements, which was over by about 1.2 million. That was offset by the revenue, which was budgeted at 4.2 million, and we received 4.5 million. The reason the revenue went up was 2 reasons: the increase in the excess cost against budgeted. If you recall, we got an 82% reimbursement. We had budgeted that at 72. And then in addition, there was a ARP grant that Mr. Mancusi applied for, received, and we've drawn down for 407,000 to offset some of the revenue expenses this year. And then one last thing before I turn it to Mr. Mancusi is that you can see the detailed breakdown in this that was provided in the packet to, not you tonight, I apologize. I can send it again in the Friday packet. This was to the Board of Finance, and I believe also the Board of Selectmen, which shows the historical spending for special ed, including the projected for the budget, and it breaks out the detail with the tuitions and then the other pieces. In addition, there were higher expenses in professional consultation, which was 179,000 over what we budgeted, and professional expenses, which is $635,000 over. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Mancusi.
Sorry, is that speech and what services were those last ones that you were talking about?
Mr. Mancusi, can you?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. The professional expenses, we saw, a rather large increase in contracted speech. That is a shortage area. So we've had to utilize multiple agencies because we're competing for the same folks that every other district is in that area, as well as we had to contract for several behavior technicians to replace unfilled paraprofessional positions, because we have, and I think we've talked about this throughout the year, we've had a real challenge with, filling all our paras positions. So we've had to reach out to, again, 3 or 4 different agencies to fill positions at a larger cost. And then included in the professional consultation account and the professional expenses is, our evaluations, an increase in the psychiatric evaluations, as well as, other evaluations that, we had to do.
I'm skipping around a little bit, but still on that topic. So, and I'm embarrassed because I tried to find it and I brought my budget books and I tried to find it before. But on this page, the statement of accounts where it says the SPED, it says the budget for 2021 was 10,730,369. It's under the line 16. And I just wanted to know, and then that's where you're showing the $3 million, the projected difference there.
Correct.
What is the equivalent of what's in next year's budget of that 10,730,000?
Sure.
That I couldn't find it. I'm sorry.
You know, it's a little odd the way we summarize these, so I'm happy to, you know, because I'm a data person too, like add a column that adds up the structure, you know, because I can get that for you, but
I just wanted to find a comparable number so I can say, okay, if I'm reading this correctly, we budgeted 10,700,000.
correct.
We're overrunning by 3 million, and I couldn't find, oh, but next year we've got 15, so we're good. Like, I don't
Correct,
know
yeah.
what that number is.
Yeah, so I have this that I did provide to the Board of Finance. It tells you, but it includes the personnel. So if I can put it in the context of that
I
sped
just would
number.
like an apples to apples.
Yes,
on
of
that
course.
line item, if
Yeah,
that's possible.
the apples to apples I could give you right now on just the tuitions if you would like. So 10.4, that was 1920, 2021, 13.1, 2021. This year, okay, 13 point, I'm sorry, the budget for this year, 10.9 for all of, that's staff. Okay, let me do it for you. And yeah, it's challenging to crosswalk it because this summary doesn't really correspond to the major classifications. Yeah,
Now I feel a little bit better.
yeah.
Find it.
It's like a historical thing that they did, but for some reason it was meaningful to show it that way. But yeah, it doesn't correspond to like the major classification. It's a summary of a bunch of account structures put together, which is how we do show it when we do our projection. So A, I can show you that, and then B, I can show you how it looks next year. Yeah, in the detail.
I cut you off, I think. Did I cut you off? I'm sorry. Okay, okay. The other question I have was under support expenses. You wrote that there were products budgeted for remote learning that will not require purchasing. I'm confused, A, why there was anything in the budget for remote learning if we weren't, like, I don't remember having anything in there. So what are we not buying that I didn't think we were planning for anyway?
Sure. So we do have the benefit of having Ms. Burns here, but I'm going to try to speak for her submission. So when we developed the budget last year, we weren't sure if we were hoping to be in full in person. We weren't sure if there would be some remote or hybrid portion of learning. So we did retain some of the more helpful things that we were using in full remote instruction in the budget that we subsequently found out that we did not need, to the tune of $43,000. An example of which is, Nancy, I wrote it down, but I'm not finding it. It was science software that was instructional software that we were using as a remote lab that we determined that we didn't need when we were full in person.
Okay, I guess my confusion would be that I would have assumed that anything that was COVID related at that level was grant money was being used for, not. So how did it make its way into the operating budget, I guess is.
So there were some things that we were doing instructionally, I believe, and maybe I should.
I know this was before you, so.
But that would have carried forward that that were valuable that we continued to use, I would say, from what I understand, and would build on, because we did have a model of remote instruction prior to COVID. It expanded, then we right-sized the things we were doing to what we needed for last year, and there were a few things that we determined that we thought we were going to be using that we didn't. In the budget process this year as well, we did the same kind of process. We looked as a group at the instructional software requests to see if there were some things that were duplicative or that were not enhancing instruction, and that was removed from the budget. Am I categorizing that correctly, Mr. Cummings?
You are. I think to answer Ms. Kelly's question, I think part of the issue is the timing. The budget was developed, finalized for the board last January, the current budget, right? So at that point, we were not sure about the existence, if there would be a need to support remote learning. Some of the grant funding then came after that. That would have potentially been, if we had needed it, we could have shifted into grant funding. But because it was not needed, we did neither that, nor did we buy the equipment, or the programming.
Okay, I guess the last ones are more just a quick comment than really any further questions. The first thing is just that I would caution possibly when we refer to a surplus as anything as minor. I feel like, you know, if we talk about cutting $500,000, we talk about it like the wheels are falling off. So I think just from a, I don't even want to say a PR perspective, but just I think it's not minor. $432,000 isn't in my opinion.
That's
That's
what
just in
point
my
well
opinion.
taken. Yeah.
So I just about quantifying things that way.
Thank you.
I have some concerns about. I don't want to use. I'm going to use the word credibility because I just can't think of a better one, and I apologize for that. But we spent the better part of 2 months pleading other town bodies to not cut our budget. And that's a $10 million more than the budget we have right now. And, you know, 2 days after it's approved, we get information about projections of, you know, potentially 8 less sections needed in elementary school as of right now. And I feel like none of that was brought up during the process. We were very quick to mention when, you know, medical benefits go the other way, you know, how are we going to cover that? How are we going to cover that? And I don't think there was any sort of transparency on these potential, again, I know it's just potential, but it's just another data point. And I feel like that wasn't brought up. I just have concerns about these numbers coming out in a time when, I mean, it is what it is. And I appreciate that that's what they are. I just feel like they don't necessarily.
If I could respond to it, because I do agree that it you know, it could be a bad look if we couldn't explain it, but this has been an absolutely another unprecedented year with our hiring. We did not hope for, nor did we anticipate up until even Q2 that we would continue to see the retirements that we did hit this year, and that we would not be able to backfill some of those positions. And the amount of time to hire the teachers, you know, we didn't think that would continue to go on. So the savings that you see in the budget are a direct result of those two functions, as well as the lack of use of buses. And we were hoping we would return to full usage of the buses. The utilities, you know, I will take some responsibility for the fact that I've followed past practice. We don't do a projection in Q2 on the utilities. We need to change that. Absolutely. I want to bring that up at the Finance Committee because a good amount of our savings is also due to utilities, and we still don't know where we stand with that because of the fact that we changed, you know, our methodology for the carrier for the natural gas this year, and there's some volatility in the pricing. But I do have to say I stand behind the fact that we need what we need next year from what we heard from the board, and because of the fact that the message was that we didn't want to size ourselves on staffing, and the majority of the savings this year, I would say do not expect to carry into next year as a result of this understaffing, as well as hopefully, you know, the understaffing piece, I would say, yeah.
That's all fair, but but I guess then that goes back to my original question about the assumption of vacancies. I don't think the trend is changing anytime soon, as I hope I'm wrong on finding paraprofessionals, on replacing teachers, on not having as many retirements. But I think when you just sat down, you said we are seeing more retirements than we anticipated, and from what we budgeted for already. So I feel like perhaps.
I think one of the things we could do next year potentially is, you know, have more frequent check-ins with the Finance Committee that we can bring out if we do see those trends, so we don't wait for a quarter. I can do monthly projections on the personnel and the health insurance, and that might be helpful. I will have to say, in my experience with the budget coming at a year-end close with a 0.23%, you're trying to land on a dime, and this is pretty close to a dime. I do have to say that you're never going to come to zero, and you don't want to come to negative. So it is a challenging thing, and we're hopeful we come to zero, but we have to be conservative in our estimates. So I just need to say that.
And I want to follow up on that. And I mentioned this in finance, the fact that we are potentially seeing a surplus of $400,000. And in large part, that's due to the fact that we didn't hire staff that arguably we needed, whether it be paraprofessional support, teachers, substitute teachers. This was not the year, I would argue, to have a hiring freeze, and we're seeing a savings monetarily, but I think that there's also a cost that we're seeing for our students. So I certainly hope that some of the retirements were due to people just being tired or burnt out, teaching through a pandemic, health concerns, and that we're moving it forward. And Ms. Leffert, I don't know if you have anything to add to this conversation from the human resources, what you're seeing as you're starting to hire again. I'm hoping a lot of this is driven from COVID, and knock on wood, hopefully these challenges that we've seen the last 2 years, we're coming out of it.
Hi, good evening. Ann Leffert, Interim Director of Human Resources. Yeah, I think there's a combination of that. The folks that we're seeing who are retiring are age eligible, and there's a few that are retiring early, but they're also age eligible. They don't have all the years in, but they've hit the mark as far as the age that they can retire. As far as hiring, we started some of our tough to fill positions, the vacancies that we know we're going to have based on retirements. We started them earlier this year. So we are out of the gate on some math positions, on some world language positions, on some special ed, speech and language. We felt we wanted to let those out when it looked like there was no FTE impact on the budget, so we could start getting some quality folks and not be behind the 8 ball if we start in late May, early June when the budget is formally adopted. So we know those positions are going to be available. So we're working with all of our teams right now, identifying where the changes are. The sections, Ms. Kelly, that you brought up, many of those in the beginning were a lower enrollment in kindergarten that we think is going to change over time. So we're watching that enrollment. Dr. Parrish is updating that for us every week. And we're using that to really keep close tabs on what are the sections we have and what will be higher. We don't at this point anticipate looking at new hires in elementary at the moment. We're pretty tight at elementary. We have some retirements that are helping us there. And we also think we're going to be okay at the middle school level with those 4 reductions, that there's not going to be any riffing of staff through the middle school. We're able to accommodate and bring those folks in. So through some transfers and movements of positions and those new interventionist positions. Does that help?
Thank you just for the update. You're good, Ms. Kelly? Okay, thank you. Ms. Massinelli.
And just through the chair to Mrs. Kelly, don't hesitate to keep going, because some people at this board will just keep going. So I don't see why you're apologizing for that. But I do want to correct, Ms. LaBour, is probably the only time I'll correct on a number ever with you here, and that you're not giving yourself enough credit with this budget by saying it came in at a 0.23. It came in at a 0.225, I believe, %. And to be that accurate on a budget this massive is, that means that to you and to all of staff, this was a really tight job. And again, to Mrs. Vitale's point, I think it bears repeating that this surplus isn't for a good reason. When I think of the number of times we had to hear about high schoolers having to have, group sessions in cafeterias because we could not get a substitute, this is not a surplus that I'm happy about it from a numbers point of view. I'm not happy about how we got it. And it's also just, I think it bears repeating for the public as well. While we know to read past a headline number, only, looking at 8 fewer kindergarten sections, we, the Board of Ed, read the next several lines to know that the volatility from May through September is striking. Other boards, do not necessarily read past that first line or past that banner. And I think it bears repeating also that if there's a cut, we're having to do it blind. We can't do it knowing what we know. I mean, if we had known this, we could have just cut that pair line and said, oh, well, we know it's going to happen. But if you cut something like JV sports in middle school to meet a $500,000 cut, it's not coming back, even if the next year there's a surplus. So it's, great to take this and go back, but I don't feel like we were not transparent to the other town bodies. I did not feel like we hid anything from them. There's an awful lot we don't know. I'm grateful that we have the surplus. I'm hoping we finally have a better handle on sped out placements, And I hope that number starts going in a negative direction, obviously, through so many of the things we're putting into place. But I did just want to add that. And I also feel the need to say that I know we always reference retirements as helping. I do want to remind about the flip side of that is decades of experience walking out the door. And that while it's a great thing financially, it is not a great thing for the district in many cases. And so to all of those retirees, thank you for all that you've done for the district, but there's an awful lot that's going to have to be done to replace that body of knowledge. And then I just finally had one quick question because Mrs. Kelly took all the questions I had on the budget. Is at this point then, are things unfrozen? That the things we had planned for, that we expected to have been purchased and invested and maintenance, et cetera, that has all been addressed?
Correct, yes. The capital accounts, they're spending their normal amount that they would in spring, which is the allocation of, there's a number that each school gets. I don't want to say it because I don't want to say the incorrect number, but they know that they've been putting in their requisitions for that. We did pay attention to the town and hear that they don't want to see a big spending flurry at year end. So we're working hand in hand with the schools and with all of our district leadership to get all of their orders for the things that they had planned for this year in now. So it's not that big year end flurry of spending that happens. So.
Thank you for that. And I will specifically highlight the school uniforms. I don't want to hear about any money being returned from athletics. Please get these kids some good clothes. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Peterson.
Hi, thank you for that. I was going to mention exactly the same thing. I'm just going to skip ahead. I had contacted you about issues about the utilities. In the description, you say that electric, heating, utility generation rates were budgeted at contractual levels, but those contracts have expired. And are we currently paying market prices for our energy?
We are currently paying market rate for natural gas. We currently have a contracted rate for electricity, and it's a good contracted rate. We've probably done better than others in Connecticut on electricity. But we went to market for the natural gas. Our consultant on the town side had identified savings. He did a look back with the town of 18 months. And if we went directly to the market rather than to the supplier rather than through the contractor or the consortium, the rates the supplier offered were much higher than what we were getting would get on the market, to the tune of about $102,000 over an 18-month period of savings as a look back, for what the market rate was versus what we were paying.
This is for natural gas.
This is for natural gas.
And you're adding a year in there that was not.
He did a year so he looked at it as a percentage, which is why, I said to you, I think we do need to bring this back to Finance Committee. I'd like to do some work with you on it. Right now, we are at market. This was a decision by the town, and we're out to market for a year. So once you leave the contract, you've got to be at market for a year. So our next opportunity to do something differently would be December 31st of 2021. With the natural gas. With electricity, same. It expires the current contract expires December 31, 2022. And we probably will see some pretty significant increases because electricity corresponds with what's happening in the gas world, as we know. So right now, the contracts that they're seeing are much higher than our rates and a little higher than our budgeted rates, which is why, I think it's really important that we pay attention and look at this. Working with Angeles and working with the Finance Committee and working with the town's energy consultant. And/or he mentioned also looking at some of the consortiums. So, we're active in the local Ed Advance and CASBO groups. So I'm talking to some other people about who are ready to go out to market, what they're thinking of doing for next year as well. Natural gas, I didn't know this, but our energy consultant said in Connecticut, you typically always do better going to market. So I want to drill down and explore that a little more, that statement, because I didn't know that. I'd rather personally see a locked in rate, especially when it's volatile, but we'll look more deeply at it. You also asked about what we're budgeted. So the rate that Sprague offered to Gerald was 0.98 per therm rate for 1 year, 0.9285 for 2, and 0.8823 for 3 years. And what we are projected to pay for 22 is 0.7. So we did, beat what they would have locked in as a 3-year rate for right now. And what we had for next year was 0.88. It's a CCF price of 1.32. And that's kind of what we're seeing right now. So it's a little unpredictable, but I look forward, if the finance committee does want to look at this, I think it's a good opportunity for us to maybe achieve savings above a volatile market. So
Yeah, I would very much welcome that, and if you could forward those numbers as well, that would be great.
Sure.
As you mentioned, the key word in your commentary was volatile, which for natural gas it absolutely has been this year, and that's been my concern as somebody who's watching the daily fluctuations in the natural gas price. So if the more detail we can get about where our expenditures are, and if we're better off going to market, I'm happy to do that. I guess I would like to see that proven to me. So I'm happy to have that discussion in some detail.
Yeah, I look forward to that. And we can talk to other municipalities too and bring some more people into the conversation. So that'd be great.
Thanks. I appreciate the work.
Any other questions on the quarterly? Ms. Kelly?
I just wanted to follow up on two quick things. I totally understand that the surplus, I do want to say that I get it, that it didn't come from a place where we wanted it to come from this year. It's not like we found these amazing efficiencies in Fairfield Public Schools. I get that that's where it came from. I just want to make sure that we are projecting that reality. We did it already. I know that, but I just want to better understand that we weren't aggressive in saying all of our para positions are going to be filled, or we're going to have the regular retirement rate that we've had. Like, this is a different economic environment. This is a different job force environment. And I just want to make sure I have a better handle that newer reality was reflected in the numbers that we chose, or if we were overly aggressive / conservative, depending on which way you look at it.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share that with you because I think that's really good for you to know and to give feedback on as we move forward. So, and to your point on the retirements, we did assume our standard 19 again, and we've already seen upwards of 30 and change for next year as well. So that's part of what we're using to offset some of the other things we'll talk about in just a few minutes when we talk about the budget. But you're right, like, you all should know as we go through the budget process, all the assumptions behind those big drivers of the budget. So
Right. And to follow up also on the 8 sections, and we've follow up, and I did send another email to Mike today to just ask, like, because again, I'm new here, like, so is there typically like a summer surge, like, which I'm sure there is. So I'm aware that 8 is it's in pencil, not in pen, and I'm aware that there's more to come and that there's movement. So
very much appreciate that. Yeah.
Any other questions on the quarterly? Okay, move on to Esther and ARP grant quarterly update.
Okay, the overall grant revenue is 13.8 million, of which we've expended 7.4, and we've drawn down 3.9, which is about where we'd expect to be this point in time of the year, given that a few of the grants are multi-year. Of that, ARP ESSER and COVID-related recovery is 4.9, of which we've drawn 1.4 million to date. We are meeting on the ARP ESSER and the ESSER grants on the 18th. And we've already right-sized the budgets for what we talked with you about during the budget process. So those shifts of about $1 million, we've not gotten approval yet from the state, but we have reflected those changes in our budget system in Munis, just because they were big amounts and we didn't want anybody to overspend in any categories. So we're in the process of finalizing those revisions to get them over to the state on the 18th.
Thank you.
And I don't see my grant report in the backup. I may have not attached it. I do apologize. If you do not mind, I will send that out in the Friday packet as well as the write-up. And if you have questions, feel free to follow up and we can add it to the next board agenda. I do apologize.
Absolutely. And we did spend a lot of time during the budget process just reviewing the grants. But if you could forward that to the board, that would be appreciated. If anybody has questions on the grants, just follow up with Ms. Laborious. And if anything substantial comes up, we can always just add it to a future agenda.
Thank you.
Okay, first reading of administrative proposal for 2022-2023 budget adjustments.
Send out the, Ms. Laboris is going to speak to this, and I'll pass out some to members of the audience.
Okay,
Bless
bless
you.
you. So the top, this is identifying items that came up as part of the budget process that we realized that we have to make some adjustments for next year. One of which is the superintendent search. We did hold aside some money this year for the amount that will be spent this year, and then this is what we projected we would need for next year. There are legal costs associated with the new position for the HR director, not having that background. This is a really broad estimate. We don't know what that would be. We need to refine that, working with the legal group team at the legal teams that we work with. So there's 5 or 6 firms that we work with, but that's a broad estimate based on the stipend of the former director, executive director, as well as some of the additional work that she took on with the rates, the legal rates that we see for those services. Health insurance, you might wonder why it's low, even though the rate was high, and I'll explain that. The medical health insurance, if you'll recall, we budgeted at 6.5%. We know that the state rate came in at 10.5%, and that we initially were projecting, when we projected at 8.5%, which was what we earlier thought, was going to be an impact of about 408,000. 6.5 to 10.5 is about 665,000. It was offset by a really unexpected reduction in the dental rates. So we projected a similar increase per our conversations with Aon of 6.5% to the dental rates. We were fortunate to see a reduction from this year's rate of 11.8%. So the net difference between that plus 6.5 to a minus 11.8 is a $300,000 savings. So the impact to our health insurance budget is estimated to be about $366,000. So the amount we'd be looking at for needing for next year's budget associated with those items is about $586,000. So we've identified some savings or adjustments to the budget that happened since the budget process started. One is that we were made aware by the town during the budget process of a $100,000 adjustment for an actual correction for the town pension. The second is we needed to add a bus for a particular student that we since learned was going to not need transportation. There's still a student that's getting services by us, but they're getting transportation by another means. And so that was $85,000. We mentioned the retirees. We have 29 retirees currently on the list, 3 of which had already been backfilled because they left this year. So the savings you're seeing here is the result of that 26 times 20,000, or a total of 520,000, of which we budgeted for 19, or 380,000. So the difference you see there is the 140. We do anticipate that we could see as many as 8 additional retirees based on the conversations we're having now. And so I'm holding that aside as potential savings. We were asked to identify some structural change at central office, and I'm just going to invite my colleague, Director Nancy Burns, up to speak about the proposed adjustments to the information technology group.
Good evening. I'm Nancy Burns, the Director of Information Technology for the district. As you may recall, we talked about a cybersecurity audit last summer. And at that time, I indicated that we were going to ask for a cybersecurity analyst as part of our budget process. As the budget process continued, we talked with staff about structural change. Many of you that have listened to me over the years know that our department continues to evolve and adopt structural changes, things like going to cloud services instead of buying servers, looking at staffing models, and a bunch of other things. So in talking with them about the new position, they actually worked together and came to me with a proposal where they felt that the current engineer position could be split between the 3 folks who have held the help desk roles for from 7 to I think 18 years. So I accepted the challenge and I said to them, that's a big ask. I'm really concerned about your ability to take on those engineering responsibilities in addition to the other things that you do. So I said, figure it out between the four of you and then give me a proposal about who's going to do what and then do it. So we did. And I can't tell you the phenomenal change in their demeanor, their enthusiasm for their jobs, the cross-training that's happened, the backdrop, the secondary folks who have started to understand different engineering roles. It's really been kind of an enrichment experience for them, I guess is the best way I can put it. And our network engineer, who you met last August, is very interested in assuming the cybersecurity role in a permanent fashion, which she actually has successfully done for the last 5 or 6 years as part of her engineering position. So I went to Mike and Courtney and Zakia and said, this is what's happened, and I am supporting my staff in the recommendation for this change. I'll also say that this is a little aside on this structural change piece, we don't have room at the inn for another staff member. Mr. Papa George and I went through about 6 other iterations to try to figure out where we could possibly park somebody, to no avail. So that was another incentive for making this structural change.
Mr. Peterson.
I'm sorry, could you just clarify, so if I understand correctly, you're basically promoting someone from inside to the cybersecurity position, and 3 current staff members are taking on the responsibilities of that one person who's been promoted?
That's correct,
Okay.
with a slight adjustment to their salaries to compensate them for the additional responsibilities.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate the effort.
Ms. Mascanelli.
Okay, that's not how I understood what you said. So that my understanding from this was that we are adding the new position that we budgeted for, but we are then cutting a position and rejiggering how people are in terms of their job descriptions.
That is correct. Yeah. So what we basically are doing is taking away the network engineering job as a one-time FTE and sliding into that position the cyber analyst, which was an add as part of our budget process, and taking the engineering position, as Mr. Peterson said, and jury rigging it with the other 3 folks who are taking on those responsibilities. So it's really a net zero to FTE, but a shifting of some of the dollars that were in the budget to compensate the folks for what the new responsibilities they've taken on.
Okay, and if I just use the same word, different words to say the same thing, sorry, but I just want to make sure that my understanding was accurate. And also, just curious, I'm thrilled that you were able to do this. Again, these aren't the sexy kind of structural changes, but never let it be said that we aren't trying to do this. I just have one question, and I don't know if you can even answer this, but do you in any way worry that the knowledge base then of our existing staff would be really hard to ever replicate? If you understand my question?
I do. I think what we've done, and actually spoke to Mr. Cummings about this when we first started talking about it, I think what we've done is added to their job responsibilities in a way that's enhancing retention in a very competitive job market in technology. We are very lucky that, especially with the central office tech staff, we have longevity. And as we change from defined benefit pensions to 401As, the incentive to staying in a job is different than it once was, a decade or 2 ago. So there's a lot more flexibility in their ability to jump from one job to another. So when we have talent, we want to retain it. And by encouraging them to take on additional roles and responsibilities, it gives them the ability to enhance their knowledge base. Could we replicate those jobs? I think we're going to have to look at teams as people matriculate out and see where we may need to adjust responsibilities. I think the way we've allocated the responsibilities of the job helps because we try to kind of categorize similar things together. Like we have a network services person who does endpoint stuff, and then we have another person who does safety and security, things like the door mechanisms and the badge system and the IP cameras. We've absorbed as a department the transition in the last decade to the Internet of Things. There pretty much isn't anything in this district that's electronic that isn't passing through our network and that we touch. And people just absorbed all that. So if we can reward them intellectually and in their jobs, I'm all for that.
Mr. Asa.
Just a follow up on this. So, Ms. Laborious, the $108,000, does that equate to the 1.0 FTE that is basically being eliminated in full, or does that also include the adjustments and increases for the new job responsibilities?
The latter, yeah, includes the adjustment. So 85,000 is the staffing associated, the savings, and then there's the benefits as well. So that's why you're seeing the 108,008. So 85,000 of that is the staffing off, because I think that the original
Let
position.
me rephrase my question. The increase to the 3 IT personnel, is that included in this 108 number, or is there an increase that we're not seeing here that is going to have to be paid to those people that
It's
we did not
included in
budget?
this number here.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah. And also the 1.0, I think, I just want to clarify, Nancy said it's not a 1.0 FTE loss. It's not a loss of any of our active FTE, but it is a -1.
Yeah, it's not a
budgeted-
net zero.
Budgeted FTE, yeah.
It is a net, it is a reduction of 1. We're
It's
just
a-
not laying anybody off or
Correct.
losing people.
Correct. And it's not a 1-for-1 because of the fact that it's reassigning some of the functions and formatting that function for those three individuals. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, because that's what was going to be my next statement was it isn't a net zero. It is an actual reduction. Thank you.
Ms. Jacobson.
I know the answer probably to this question, but you probably can guess what I'm going to ask you. The person who's assuming the cybersecurity analyst position from within. Wonderful to hear. Just want you to confirm for the record that the things that came out of the audit that we're looking to enhance and augment fits with the skill set of the individual that you're promoting.
She's basically proven that over the past 12 months since the audit was done. Actually, she did some of it during the audit as she learned things. And we've adopted some of the items that were recommended for change and adopted some of those tools. Thank you for the funding for adding to our cybersecurity toolbox, because that was also of great help. And I'm very proud of the work that she's done.
Thank you.
And just to follow up on that, so no additional training or professional development. I mean, it's wonderful that this is happening, but we want to give supports as these people are taking on added responsibility so they can be successful.
Yeah, she's actually scheduled for a course next month. And there is funding in the budget to continue that training should we find it necessary. We've also sent her to some cybersecurity seminars and webinar things that have been going on across the state.
Thank you. Mr. Asa, followed by Ms. Kelly.
Yeah, so moving on to this transportation line.
But hold on, before we move on, does anybody else have any other questions about Ms. Kelly?
And I apologize if you mentioned this when you first sat down. So I get the timing right. When did your staff get together and have that meeting?
They came to me as the budget was finalized in January, and I started talking to them about the additional staff member that I had put forward in the budget. I always talk to my staff, as Mike does, to the district leadership team to let them know what we put forward, what made it through Mike's culling, if you will, so that they were aware of it. So I had told them about the position, and they met and came up with this plan.
Does anybody else have any other questions just for Ms. Burns about the technology position? Mr. Cummings?
Thank you. I just want to thank Ms. Burns and her department. She's mentioned, and this is just the latest example of the creativity that goes on in many of our departments, but we're going to highlight the IT department right now. So much has changed in the work they do over the years, and they've absorbed so many of those changes internally. This is just the latest example. When Ms. Burns came to us last week to present this idea to Ms. Laborious, Ms. Leffert, and myself, we really leapt at it because one, it saves money, but two, it really is about, as Ms. Burns mentioned, building the skill sets of staff, people who are very valuable to us, and hopefully encouraging them to stay with us and to continue to grow with us. And I think what I also hear within what she's saying, what I see in what she's doing, but I want to highlight is there is a multiplicity of roles. People understand each other's roles. And there's also a succession plan being built in, and this is just the latest example. So I just want to say thank you and to you and to the team, because it really is, this is exactly what education's about.
Thank you. Ms. Massacanelli?
I just had one follow-up and then one new question. So just to, I just want to clarify. In January, your staff proposed the idea, but it was at that point, nothing was definite. That's where you said, show me you can actually make this happen. So it wasn't until very recently that you had the faith that yes, it could, and that Fairfield Public Schools would not be diminished by this effort.
That's absolutely correct, because I felt very strongly that it was an additional burden that I needed them to demonstrate that they could accept. And there was also a lot of cross-training that had to take place. So I actually kept it very close to the vest because I didn't want to plant a seed that I wasn't going to be able to deliver on. So they really spent the last 4 months showing me that they could do it. And I'll give you a great example of why it's paid off is we had a major failure on a server this morning, and our engineer was out sick. And I didn't bat an eyelid. They came, they said, can I send an email out to everybody telling them what's going on? I said, absolutely. They sent out the email. They addressed it with the third-party vendor that we use when Donna's not around. They all did what they needed to do in tandem with them. And within an hour or two, it was resolved. But I didn't have to call up the vendor. I didn't have to call Donna, offer her sick day. I didn't have to do any of those things. They proved that they could meet the challenge. So it was just one more validation to me that this is the right decision.
Thank you. And then I just had one other question to Ms. Laborious, or maybe it's to Mr. Cummings, I'm not sure. The 7 people we aren't hiring in that retiree line, you know, that we're looking at 26 and we're budgeting for 19. Can we have color on that?
No, you want to speak to that? Go ahead. Yeah, you can explain that.
Just to be clear, it's not that we're not hiring them. Every time someone retires, they retire because at a high salary because they've been with us for so long, presumably, typically. And so we can typically see savings because typically on average, the person we hire is about $20,000 less just in our experiential history.
No, that's, I apologize, my misreading. I thought you were saying, I had read this to mean that there were 26 additional retirees, but we're only hiring 19. So I
sorry.
apologize, my misreading.
Yeah, it's just the difference between the value of the retirees that we thought we'd have versus what we have. Yeah. And the differential in the salary. Okay, there's one other item I just wanted to point out.
Just Ms. Reza?
Yeah, and I might need Mr. Mancusi for this. Please. So with regard to the transportation line of 85,000, I'm not going to lie, I get a little nervous eliminating a full amount here. And I just wanted to know if you could clarify, while it's wonderful that a parent will provide transportation, isn't it also possible later on that they could request it and then we're going to be on the hook for this?
If it were a PPT placement, it would be on the hook. You know, we've been in consultation with this family, so we feel confident with this decision.
Okay, and we, in this past year and in years past, have we had a deficit in sped transportation?
Not recently. So this year, no, because of the shortage in the drivers. Last year, no, they budgeted, well, also because of COVID. Year prior, I would say prior to our current transportation director, we budgeted a little bit more aggressively in that category for various reasons, and he was budgeting more appropriately. So I believe we closed, you know, good or in the black in this area the last few years.
Okay,
Even
well, you
prior
hit
to
on
COVID.
you hit on where I was going with the previous, because I do remember in years past that we were going, and when I see this big number here, I get nervous if we're leaving enough in the pot to cover any overages, and I wonder whether we should be eliminating this full amount or a portion of it. And I'm not trying to say that we should just be leaving money in an account to leave it in there.
Yeah.
But I
This
just
is
wanted
a-
to hear, and if you're telling me that that you're comfortable with this and you don't think that there's going to be other avenues in this same category that we're going to need to cover because we're over, then that's fine.
I'm comfortable with this. If it were a PPT placement, I would not be comfortable with it, but the way this is right now, I'm comfortable with it.
And I do have to say, we are planning on doing much more frequent monitoring. Again, transportation, we would often wait until after Q2 to do our projections. Mr. Snyder works with us closely with Mr. Papageorge. You know, we're going to do real-time assessments. So if we see that, we're also going to be doing that in other parts of the budget. So, you know, I'm hopeful. I don't want to hold money that we don't think at this point we need.
Thank you, guys.
Ms. Jacobson? I mean, you're about to raise your hand.
Yeah, I'm at the bottom section. Does anyone have any of the?
We're good.
Right.
We'll just, I think that Ms. Laborious was about to go to the bottom section, but I want to see if we have any questions on the top section before we go there. Okay.
So,
Yep. Go ahead, Ms. Reza.
Sorry. This legal line, had we not, had we floated a number about this prior?
it was lower, but we looked at our current year experience and we are a little overextended in legal services while we were without the person with that expertise. And so we adjusted it. It could be lower. We should refine it a bit more. The purpose of this is to show that, you know, we do have needs next year. We're going to continue to refine them, but that could be 150. Again, here, it's a little gray for me, so I need to do a little more research on that.
Okay, yeah, because I know obviously shifting when we hired our last HR director, they came with a JD degree and experience on the legal side. So the idea that was sold to the board was that, you know, we'll save money in the legal. And in going this direction, is there any potential that the new position not being a requirement of having a JD means that position may be paid less than what was originally budgeted?
We're not currently assuming that. We're currently assuming they're paid at the same rate. I would say we do believe that role to be invaluable.
Okay, so there was a stipend involved then for additional legal. I just want it to be clear to the public that
Correct.
okay, so the new HR position will be paid for the same HR work, but will be saving in essence or a stipend will be going towards this, or I'm just a little confused.
Did we finalize on the salary, Mr. Cummings? I do apologize.
No, I don't think we did. I think that, but I think, Mr. Ray, what you're saying is in the former HR director's position, there was a salary and then there was a stipend for legal that supplemented that and led to the total. So we have to land on the salary for the position that would be whole, not in those two different pieces.
It's
As was-
budgeted assuming it's still the same and that we'd need this additional funding. So meaning the same inclusive of the stipend, but for a different function, correct? in the
Okay,
budget.
and I don't want to get into the weeds. I know you're in the process of recruiting for that position, so we shouldn't be talking about those numbers right now, but I just wanted that clarity. Thank you.
Yeah, and we did do a multi-year look back to see what the legal services were prior to the current position as part of looking at that number. And also, you know, depending on the candidate and their level of expertise, we'll modify that number as well.
Yeah, and that's appreciated because this time next year, we don't want to be looking at freezing an account because we didn't account enough for this line. So thank you.
Correct, yeah.
Ms. Kelly?
Real quick, this is more of a comment than a question. I did just want to point out and say thank you for looking, when making these adjustments, for looking to central office for that save. I appreciate that. And I did just want to point out that, again, to thank you for coming up with almost $600,000 in savings without having, you know, and keeping it away from the kids. We didn't have to touch the paras. We didn't have to increase class sizes, all the draconian, you know, scenarios that were floating out there. So I appreciate that you came up with, you know, a significant amount of money and keeping it away from the kids. So just wanted to say that.
And I think that some of this work that was done just earlier on in the budget process when we were looking at the potential $2.5 million reduction. Mr. Cummings put the list together. When we were concerned about potentially having to reduce staff, reached out, just trying to get the notification of retirements sooner rather than later, which I think, we're seeing this now that we have this information sooner in the budget process. And the same thing with looking at central office. It's hard to necessarily pinpoint where that might be in February. So I appreciate that the work that Ms. Burns did, and I would really encourage other departments to really take the same initiative. So thank you, Ms. Kelly, for that and for the work of everybody who really just to bring this forward. And with that, we will now get down to the underpinnings of what's coming out of the state and some of the decisions that were made at the state level that could potentially be impacting next year's budget.
So we're still assessing the impact, and this is just coming out, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Jacobson, but that was on Wednesday, I believe, or Tuesday. It was just recently, last week, midweek. The legislative
I think it was the 4th, right?
yeah.
The 4th.
Yeah. And so one is something that we thought might happen, but we have the numbers behind. So the excess cost legislation is creating a 3-tiered reimbursement method based on the property wealth per capita to determine the grant amount of the excess cost. And so you can see the percentages per their relative location in that scale. And given that we're in the 1 to 58 scale, we would receive 58.7, where we're budgeted for 72%. So that's an impact of about $700,000 to our budget. We weren't reflecting it here yet because we need to have those conversations and affirm that this is happening and that's the number, and we'll move forward and make our adjustments at that point. But I wanted to make everyone aware that this is where we are now. And then there's additional other considerations I just wanted to make folks aware of that I was talking with Mr. Peterson about earlier: cost of fuel and inflation. We will continue to monitor the price of durable goods, services, and heating and transportation fuels, as well as electricity, and make any necessary adjustments. Also work to make sure that we're getting the best possible prices and all of those things. And then paraprofessional, paraeducator professional development is included here because that was included in the legislation as well. We do have money in a grant set aside for that. We don't know what the ultimate cost will be because we just, found out. So we're looking at what that would mean in terms of cost for a PD day, and then also if there is additional cost or if we could do that in-house. So we'll keep you updated on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you, Ms. Laborious.
Thank you.
I just want to make a comment, not a
Yep.
question.
Yep.
There might be other things to go into the bottom section. So I've
Yeah.
just to let everyone know, I've made Mr. Cummings aware of some as we went along, but little things here and there. So you might see more things come into the bottom section.
We might be getting updates on that, and also just as this list evolves based on what's coming out of the state, I would just encourage board members, if you're not comfortable with what the administration has put forward, if you have your own ideas on possible adjustments, to forward them to Mr. Cummings. Mr. Asa.
I just wanted to make a quick comment about Mrs. Laborious or Ms. Laborious, and just say thank you for your kind of new ways and outlooks and changing some of the formats and what we're looking at. And thank you for working with the Finance Committee. I know I'm no longer on the Finance Committee, but I appreciate the willingness and ability to kind of change the way we've done things and presented things in the past to be a little bit more clear, and also some of the new out-of-the-box thinking. So I appreciate that, and I look forward to Finance and you working together to do that. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. Approval of minutes. That the Board of Education approve the April 12th, 2022 regular meeting minutes. Can I have a motion? Ms. Guernsey, seconded by Mrs. Gerber. Any discussion? Any comment from the public? Take it to the board for a vote. All in favor? Motion carries 8-0. Okay, moving on to the superintendent's report. Mr. Cummings, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Several items this evening. I'm going to start with a update or a report on the State Board of Education meeting, which was last Wednesday. Ms. Jacobson, Ms. Vitale joined myself and Dr. Parrish at the State Board meeting. It was, we were up there, I think we were up there for 5 days. Somebody told me it was only an hour. But we presented the update on the racial imbalance plan to the State Board of Education. There were a number of concerns with the update we presented to them. The bottom line is we came out of there with an expectation from the State Board of Education that we would provide an update on the racial imbalance plan within 3 months. So sometime in early August, that they would then expect the Fairfield Public Schools to be at their September board meeting. I've already, Dr. Tracy happened to be at the State Board meeting for a different reason. He stayed through the presentation, our presentation, and he and I have communicated. He will be coming into the district in 2 weeks to meet with Dr. Parrish, Dr. Savichansik, and Ms. Marte and myself to look at beginning that next iteration of the plan, because essentially he will be the one bringing it forward to the state in August and presenting it to them in September. The state gave us some indication of what they're looking for in that plan. It's very clear from the outcome of that meeting that they are expecting the Board of Education to commit to a redistricting option and to put a date on that. Other efforts to address the racial imbalance at McKinley have not been successful. So that essentially is how the state is saying this is really the only option you have available to make this work. So again, they would like a date on it. In anticipation of that, or in advance of that date, what they're immediately looking for in our next iteration of the plan that will be due to them in August, is how are we working across the district to address the issues of equity, to raise the professional learning and expectations of our staff, to address the issues that occur when students misbehave and do things that they shouldn't do, say things they shouldn't do. How are we addressing those concerns? I feel pretty confident that work has begun in earnest, and some of it, certainly a lot of it, is captured in the district improvement plan that you got the first look at today. And how we bring that out, put a focus on that for the next racial imbalance plan will be part of the work to be done over the next few months. In addition, they were clear about some expectations they stated the expectations specifically for the Board of Education. Those included things like the crafting and adoption of an equity policy, and for the Board of Education to actually engage in some professional learning themselves around issues around equity and inclusion. And those are pieces that we'd like to include in the plan as well. So that's the work that we have to going forward. And again, we are going to meet with Dr. Tracy and begin that work in a couple of weeks. And I feel pretty confident that a lot of that is there already in place. Like I said, we just have to capture it and frame it the right way. I would add that we are going on June 8th to McKinley. The PTA at McKinley has invited us to present or to talk to them about the potential issues or ramifications of the plan for the McKinley school community. I have shared with the PTA leadership there that there is no plan to redistrict or address that in the 22-23 school year, that this is something still to come. But we do need to highlight with McKinley some of the McKinley families, the background of the law, what the law is expecting, and what the State Board of Ed is expecting in relation to the law. So that would be the purpose of the communication and the conversation with the PTA at McKinley on June 8th. So I think if there's any questions or things I did not cover.
Before I take to the board for questions, I just want to and add that I think that this will be really a community conversation, that McKinley is the school that is out of balance, but we did share, that we appreciate that it's not just the imbalance in McKinley, but also raising the diversity in all of the other 10 elementary schools, and that we have work to do around that issue to make those schools more welcoming to other families. We've heard from many families, and just the data has shown when we In the past, the district has run the opt-in and opt-out of McKinley, and that really hasn't moved the needle because it, in some ways, those that are looking for a more diverse environment choose to opt into McKinley. Again, I think Mr. Cummings summed it up. The state board is concerned about the overall health of the district, achievement of all students. There were some concerns about just some of the achievement data, the absentee data at McKinley. We share that we view that as a vibrant and thriving community. Some of the data points in a different direction, which is why I think that they are, pushing a little harder on us to come back with an update in 3 months. I did share where the board was in terms of our discussions about facilities, that we really were moving forward and looking at the facilities utilization and how a possible redistricting might or might not work into that. And that work was pretty much on the board's agenda right before the pandemic hit and everything. Our attentions were rightly focused in other areas and getting our kids back to school. So with that, I'm taking it to the board for any questions. Mr. Asa?
So just a question, Mr. Cummings. As you said, and I agree, a lot of some of the stuff that you've mentioned that they're asking for to now be included in the plan that they've never asked for before is already underway. But is it not the issue with the non-compliance of the law is the percentage difference between the schools, right? So while I agree and acknowledge that we're already doing the work that they're asking for, why all of a sudden are they asking for that in our report? Why can't we just focus on the language of the law and the non-compliance like we have been moving forward?
This would be my assumption based on the comments that individual board members made last Wednesday. The argument that Fairfield Public Schools is making and families at McKinley are making is that this is a very supportive environment for these students, right? The bilingual students, first generation students, families and their students, that there's a welcoming environment. Ms. Gingrave has hired bilingual staff in key positions to be able to assist these families. She herself, as a first generation, is bilingual. This is their community, and I think the stronger we make that argument and say, well, this is why we shouldn't move these students, right? They don't want to be moved. This is where they're comfortable. The state's reaction is I always want to clarify, the State Board of Education's reaction is, well, then you need to make sure that those environments are being created in all of your schools. And to some degree, right, we have bilingual students in all of our schools. So are we making sure that those supports, that availability of services is available for students no matter where they go to school? But to say that we don't want to redistrict because this is the good place for them, their reaction is, well, then you need to build a good place everywhere. Does that make sense? So how are you going to build, what are you going to do to support staff's development, to support these students in all the schools? And to some degree, I want to be really clear, whether you redistrict or not, bilingual students are moving into all of our schools. Are we providing them beyond EL services? Are we providing them other types of supports to make them successful and comfortable?
Okay. So what the state is then saying, or the State Board of Ed is trying to say, from what I'm interpreting here, is that you need to redistrict, you need to move these kids, and it shouldn't be a problem because you need to make sure you're prepared for these kids or any kids like them with these learning needs at any of your schools. But just to be clear, there's the budgetary impacts we need to think about when we're talking about these types of plans. We would need to plan for the budgetary impact of it, which I think could be great. And, you know, how it would affect our, you know, status, whether it be Title I or anything like that. So I just think that as we have these discussions, we're going to have to bring everything to the table, and make sure that we're transparent about it.
And we will, I mean, and this is not, this meeting, this was just an update. We're not in the midst of rewriting the plan right now for the discussion for tonight. Just wanted to report back.
No, but
to
to
the-
be clear, they've given
Mr.
us 3 months, so we just to be clear, so we actually have to, we're going to have this as a big part of our meetings for the next couple months.
We are absolutely going to be moving this work forward. As Mr. Cummings said, he's meeting with the PTA, and this board knows that in some of discussions that we're having on the facilities pathway might also impact some of how our plan plays out. And that's where we were before, you know.
But can I just say, I don't want to set false expectations. I understand that they want us to do this, but I'm looking at it as the chair of the facilities committee, and the plan that we had to look at this, we were going to do a deep dive over the next year, including time with the board at the full board level. So the idea of getting a true thing within 3 months, I just want to lay it out there that this is a huge ask. And I understand that it's something that's been an ask for a long time, but I also want to know that we've got a lot going on. So,
Not disagreeing with you, and share the concerns about capacity of staff, the board, the community at this particular time, but we'll move forward, and we'll be discussing it at our meetings, at our committee meetings, and if we need to have special meetings to engage the larger community as we move forward to get an update to the plan in the next 3 months. Ms. Jacobson.
So I want to make sure we understand the difference of what was asked. They didn't ask for an update. They asked for an amended plan, right? So they asked for an amendment to our approved plan, which means we have to approve an amendment, and then that amendment becomes subject to their approval or disapproval. Meanwhile, we do currently have an approved plan. So this is an ask, just to be clear. And to speak to Mr. Ace's point, again, those are asks. Those are not required in any type of statute or regulation of the things that they have asked to do. So again, these are asks that they have done. I agree, we're going to have board meetings because it's our responsibility to do this. So I'm a little concerned about some things that have happened, you know, appreciate there's short timelines, giving up these timelines that we've received and that were created, but this isn't work of the board, right? This is work of the administration. So I think that we're going to have to engage in this work. And for the June 8th McKinley meeting, board members, I assume, can attend that? I've asked for a town hall with the board or some kind of communication with us, with the McKinley community. So I'm assuming that we can attend that meeting?
I'm thinking, well, the request was to meet with with staff first. I think that the board, if we want to engage with the community, I think it's a larger, a district-wide community discussion, not just McKinley. This is impacting the entire district potentially. And if we're going to be having a town hall meeting on it, I think it should be open to all. It shouldn't necessarily be targeted just at the McKinley PTA because this potentially impacts everyone in town.
All right. Well, you can have more than one town hall, but so the answer is no board members are not going to that?
I will have to discuss it further, that in terms of number of board members, I don't want it to turn into a Board of Ed meeting where we then have members of the public needing to come to a PTA meeting.
Okay. All right. That's all I'm going to say for right now.
can I just piggyback on that?
Yes, Mr. Issa.
So I understand it's a PTA meeting, but just one suggestion, and Mr. Cummings and the staff may have already thought about this, but for this meeting and any future meetings, being that we're talking about a large portion of the families that would be directly affected by this being bilingual, I'd like to make sure that we strategize on a way that we can get as many of those families out feeling comfortable, and that whether that means that there's interpreter services or what, that I just want to make sure that we get everybody gets heard and gets a voice and gets to hear our administration and understand in a language that they follow.
Thank you, Mr. Yates. We'll work with Ms. Kingrave on that. This is I think this is a standard condition of their PTA meetings and presentations as it is, but we'll make sure that that happens.
Mrs. Maxinelli.
A few comments. First, I actually want to piggyback on Mrs. Jacobson's point. Having been through this idea of a town hall back in, I don't remember if it was 2004, 2005, when McKinley was identified, they had a public meeting, mostly invited, anyone could go, but it was primarily geared towards the McKinley community. They filled the gym. It was a packed house. And I do think this is something where that community deserves the exclusive attention of the board to listen. And again, and it's just to listen. But I also agree with your point, Ms. Vitale, that we also would need a second one. But I would be in favor of both. I think there's something to feeling safe, to letting the McKinley community share their particular concerns. And then, obviously I think we need the town hall. So I just wanted to put my voice out there, but a few other points.
Can I just follow up on that? And I don't, disagree in terms of we can't have a town hall with just McKinley, but in terms of the board, I don't want to necessarily turn a PTA meeting where they've reached out to administration into potentially the board's town hall. I think there could be multiple meetings and multiple venues where we can engage and drive that conversation. That's all.
No, I completely agree. The PTA meeting, it's whomever they want to invite. I'm not trying to steal that meeting or if that had been easy, great, but at least put the offer out there to them that we would be willing to do so. That was my only point with that. A few other things I just want to caution. I don't like hearing the State Board of Ed use this language, and I hope that we can also be careful about, I don't want to reference our other 10 schools as having problems. That constantly, it's the other schools that have a problem. They don't have problems. They are neighborhood schools that represent their community. I don't like referring to, no matter what the makeup of the school, I don't like any of us referencing, and I'm not accusing anyone, I just think it's something we need to be on guard against, of saying, McKinley's not the problem, it's the other schools that are the problem. No, none of them are a problem. We have a situation, I guess is what I'd say, and I just wanted to put that out there. Third point, and I would this to the chair, because we're going to get asked, and I would like to be proactive. Can we speak with, through the first Selectwoman's office to the town attorney to find out exactly what our legal standing is? Because we are going to get asked about challenging this. Our constituents will. I would like us to have an answer. And it's not one that, we are not attorneys. None of us should be weighing in on this. And I assume there's a specialty to this. I'm not looking to get out of, I'm not advocating one way or the other, but we will be asked by the community at large for, do we have to do this? Why do we have to? And I would like a legal, and I don't want the State Board of Ed providing that answer. I would like our town attorney to do so. And so
we could have a meeting with our attorney just to get our, her guidance for us as board members. As you all know, we took an oath of office to basically follow the laws of Connecticut, the Constitution of Connecticut, whether or not we agree with those laws or not. And that is for our board. That is our responsibility. We get our authority from state statute, and moving forward, like it or not, we need to follow the guidance given. But I think that this conversation would probably be better had in executive session with legal. And I don't want to,
Okay, but I guess my point, Mrs. Vitale, is that, okay, I'll admit reading some social media helps on this topic, but as I'm not a legal expert, but in terms of the risk that can be assumed, it's a town risk. It's not just a district risk. So that's why I hear your point that what we are charged to do in the oath that we took as Board of Ed, but I promise you, a mother who's looking at having her children in different schools,
really doesn't care about the oath we took, but if there is the knowledge of what an attorney said, I don't want to get into a back and forth, but I think we're going to get asked. I would like to have a legal opinion offered to them. That's my point. If there's a reason not to, we could discuss that later. That's just something I would like to be able to point to the public. I am also hoping that our director of DEI is going to be weighing in on this, because obviously that's a voice I would really like to hear from, and that includes the research behind how students are best served educationally. You know, I get compliance with the law. Well, we did an awful lot of compliance all through COVID, and I knew we had to comply. That doesn't mean it was what was best for kids at all points. And this situation is facing us now as well. And there is compliance, but there's also, let's keep in mind what's best for kids. And my last point, to hear Mr. Cummings, I've only made it about 20 minutes through the meeting, so I haven't gotten to that part in terms of listening. But hearing the extent to which the State Board of Ed went in terms of what they were requesting in this amendment, the main part I had heard was, we want the compliance date. Give us the compliance. But what you're saying is a whole different flavor of what they're expecting, of what suggesting whatever regarding PD and what you're doing here, there. And okay, what I wrote on my paper was butt out. I'll try to say it nicer, but I think that our amendment should be, how do we get in compliance, and telling the state what we're doing one step further. I don't think is their peer review. I appreciate their suggestion. And that will be for us to do. I know we want to be welcoming to our students. We're probably going to be talking about that as we next look at our open choice students. I absolutely think it's very important for us. But I think there was a little overstepping there, and I'm not necessarily interested in complying.
You understand, though, that as educators who get licensed by the state of Connecticut, we don't really have a choice
In what?
in complying.
No,
The
no,
State
no.
Board of Ed tells me to do something, I have to. And that's true of all of us. Like, if they're saying that these are the components of a plan that we're looking for, we really don't have the option of saying,
We can say we will offer professional development.
well, I think we have, I don't think that they're asking for is a major stretch for us, because it is components of the district improvement plan.
What they were asking for was that we comply with the law.
They are asking that we comply with the law. But the immediate amendment that they're seeking is, what are we going to do in 22-23 to support students across the district in terms of the equity and inclusion piece? And what is the Board of Ed going
I guess
to
I
do?
say that, how dare they assume we're not? I think that's the part.
Well,
There's
but
something offensive about the
I
assumption
don't want to be in
that
a
we're not
position-
caring for these children.
You're putting me in the position of defending the State Board of Ed.
I know, and that's all.
So-
That's horrible. I'm sorry, Mr. Cummings.
But I think, you know, if I could say it, when we frame the argument, this is what I was trying to say before. If we frame the argument all the time as this is where these students are the most successful because of all the supports we've put in place for them, and yet the data shows that they really are not that successful academically. They're not. The attendance rate there is among the worst in the district. And I want to be really clear here. Everybody at McKinley is working really, really hard to support these kids. So this is by no means a knock at all on the McKinley community, the McKinley staff. The data is what the state is looking at. It is very clear to me that as I sat there at that meeting, every one of those State Board of Ed members had data sheets on McKinley. Because
Those the data sheets showing we had an achievement gap.
Right, and that informed the question.
Right achievement
But it
gap.
informed the questions that they were having. Achievement gap in Fairfield, McKinley related to the other schools. So I think that when we look at what they're asking us to do from the district, not just for McKinley, and we're going to support students across the district, that does tie in to the work that we are doing in the school system to support students of color, bilingual students across the district. So I don't have an issue bringing that forward to them, because it's stuff that we're doing, and quite honestly, we should be proud of. We have a lot of work to do, and it's more than just a year, as we know, but this is the work of closing opportunity gaps and addressing the very needs that are going to get to those key performance indicators that we just shared about on the DIP. So to my mind, we can do that. I think the harder lift here rests with the board, right? It's that, yes, they do want a date. They want a date. They want a date on the plan when the board is going to commit to making the change. They didn't, I don't know if I don't remember, did they have maybe suggestions for dates, but they want a date. And they also, like I said, they were asking, it was very clear because we were taking notes, they would like the board to commit to developing an equity policy, and they would like the board to engage in the professional learning to understand from their perspective what the issue is that McKinley is racially imbalanced. That's their ask of the board, that those pieces be included in any amendment that we bring forward.
Okay, so I'll just back up on one thing. Never mind the fact that they don't acknowledge all the housing issues. We'll move past that. I guess I will simply say, I of course acknowledge we have work to do in other schools. I do not think we're doing it perfectly. We absolutely can make students feel more welcome. We can address their needs better. My reaction came in large part from feeling defensive of the work that we are trying to do and of the staff that is working as hard as they are. And many families as volunteers are working as hard as they are. And I felt that an awful lot of that work was denigrated. I felt that your words were twisted, both of you. And I, as a board member, powerless to do anything but sit there and listen, I found that very upsetting. And so take that for what it's worth. But thank you for your 5 days up there.
I have two quick follow-ups.
All right, and obviously we've got a lot, we will be having more in-depth conversations about this in the months ahead. Ms. Jacobson?
Yeah, just two quick comments on that exchange. I want us to be careful when we use things like compliance with the law and what that actually means. Because the law is to have an approved plan, and that's what we have. So be very careful when people throw around words like violation of the law or violation of the... We have our approved plan. That's the law. And to Mr. Cummings, I understand your feeling and your responsibility as a superintendent to say, if the State Board of Education tells me to do something, I'm going to do it. They didn't tell you to do something. They asked us to do an amendment. So a little bit of off the shoulder, because it's not your responsibility to write this amendment. It is our responsibility, ultimately, to have to approve that. So I'm going to repeat that if we choose to do that, that then becomes subject to approval. So I'm going to repeat that sentence.
And on that, I think we will move on. Open choice seats.
Have Dr. Parrish come up. Dr. Parrish will be up for two presentations, short presentations tonight. One is on the open choice seats, as well as the update on the 22-23 enrollment.
Good evening, Zakia Parrish, Executive Director of Operations and Processes. The first report is in reference to the open choice seat distribution that will be available for the 22-23 school year. Per the board approved number of 100 spots or 100 seats in the open choice program, we will have 14 available seats for the upcoming school year. And we have decided to go ahead and allocate those seats amongst the elementary schools in order to have equitable distribution of those open choice seats amongst the schools. The schools that will receive additional or will have open spots to be able to receive students who apply through the open choice program will be Burr, there'll be 2 seats in grade 1, Dwight, 2 seats in grade 2, Jennings, 2 seats in grade 2. Let me back up. Dwight, 2 seats in grade 1, Jennings, 2 seats in grade 2, Mill Hill, 2 seats in grade 3, Riverfield, 2 seats in grade 2, Sherman, 2 seats in grade 1, and Stratfield, 2 seats in grade 1. And this will bring us to our total of 100 students in the open choice program. The attachment just provides you a distribution of where the existing open choice seats will be in the upcoming school year and the allocation of the additional seats in based on the 14 additional openings that we will have. And making this distribution and looking at the budgeted number of sections, which is on the far left-hand corner or far left-hand side of the attachment, wanted to make sure that the allocation of those additional seats did not have a budgetary impact in terms of triggering an additional section. Finally, on the very back of the attachment, you'll see the distribution of the open choice seats across the 3 levels in terms of where they are now versus where they will be in the upcoming school year.
Ms. Maxinelli.
Thank you for this. The only one I had a question about were the Riverfield numbers of second grade, and I was wondering why they weren't in first grade. And I say that only because all it would take is 2 to drop from second grade, and that should be reduced to 2 sections. Do you see what I'm looking at?
So dropping from 52, if there were 2 that dropped.
Right.
Correct. We haven't seen that happen in the current enrollment, which is next. So adding those seats there or removing it. My concern was adding them in first grade, making very big classes. Whereas in second grade, there were a fewer number of students in the classes. So unless we can guarantee, I mean, my concern would be us banking on 2 students who are currently enrolled in Riverfield in the second grade withdrawing.
Yeah, it's 23.
I understand that. So looking ahead to the 2023-24 school year, by putting these students in the second grade, if in the subsequent school year, just 2 kids happen to leave, these 2 open choice students would be responsible for adding a section, whereas that will not happen if we take 2 students into Riverfield into the first grade. Not in the 2022-23 school year.
I think she's projecting into the future year.
Look at this in the second
changes.
grade. For the 2022-23 school year, right now there are 52 second graders. So in the third grade, if just 2 leave, it should lose a section. And that's the kind of on the cusp I thought we would try to avoid. So I don't understand not putting them in the first grade where that clearly is a rock steady 4 sections.
The concern there again was the size of the classes in the first grade. They're already at 20 and 21. So trying to be, trying to take that into consideration and looking at the size of the classes in the second grade. I understand your point. It wasn't something that we looked at in terms of students withdrawing in the 23-24 school year in order to impact sections because we simply don't know if or when that will happen, but it wasn't something that was taken into consideration, but the size of the classes was a consideration.
I would be concerned about the grade 1, as Dr. Parrish said, just because we see more variability in grades K and 1. And those class sessions, while there's 4 of them, knowing that they're going to max out at 23, I just would be concerned that we're going to be getting that much closer just because of that variability that we've seen over the years in K and 1 at pretty much every site.
Okay.
Ms. Guernsey.
Just a quick question about this, because if we do invite these 14 students and their families to our schools, could you speak or someone speak a little bit to what special programs or events we would be presenting them with or welcoming them to the schools with? Did we do anything this year, and will we be doing anything for these students next year who are entering our schools, after other students have already been settled into the schools?
I'm not aware of any special programming that has happened historically or that is planned moving forward in terms of specifically targeted at students in the open choice program.
I can speak to that. I've had conversations with Ms. Marte about how we might, working with the schools, develop an outreach program to them. And one of the things that we talked about when we talked about the community outreach person was assigning that person the task of, well, essentially being focused on the McKinley-Tomlinson ward feeder pattern. One of the things in that job description is that they serve as a liaison to open choice families as well, for open choice families across the district.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Mascanelli?
Just as a quick follow-up, through the chair to Mrs. Gerber, isn't that something that Wakeman already provides a model of to some extent with Westport, that in terms of a welcoming program for open choice students?
No, that's not the case. No, Wakeman, we work with, there is a person who in the Westport School District who specifically deals with open choice, among other things. I mean, she has a few different responsibilities, but that is one of them. And there is a tremendous amount of outreach, my understanding is. And they also do have funding to pay for summer camp. Including
I apologize. That's what I was
so
thinking
that
of.
was, but I mean, it does sound to me, just in my conversations that I've had with the person in that district, that they do a fair amount in terms of, you know, trying to welcome the students into their community and provide support so that, you know, when their classmates are going to camp at Wakeman, they are going to camp at Wakeman or other places. I mean, it's not just Wakeman, there are other camps that they provide for. So it's just, it's something that's really nice to have, but obviously it comes with a price tag. So, you know, that's something to keep in mind, but it does seem like it would be something that would be a really nice model to look to get some ideas, even if we don't follow all of them, to follow some of them, because I do think it can be very helpful.
Any other questions, Teresa?
But just to be clear, all of this stuff would be done sort of in the background, right? Because we wouldn't want to draw attention to their classmates that they're coming in as open choice students. Am I feeling that correct, Ms. Guernsey?
I wouldn't be an expert on that, but I was more interested in how we would be welcoming those families to the school, especially those parents that are new to the school district, and helping to integrate their students into the school. You know, we have a way that we welcome our kindergartners to school, and this is sort of bypassing that step for them. So they're new to our community. What can we do for them?
And as you have this conversation moving forward, I just happened to have a conversation this morning with a gentleman who was a graduate of Fairfield Public Schools and participated in the open choice program, and spoke very highly how it was a transformative experience for him, and so incredibly grateful for the opportunity. He graduated from Fairfield Public Schools, went on to American University, and now I believe is working with the United Way. And he almost came tonight just to speak to the subject in public comment, but I said that I would share his contact information with staff if you were looking for somebody just to hear from a graduate of the program in moving the program forward, to Ms. Guernsey's point of supports, so these students can feel truly part of our community and supported moving forward. Any other questions on this? Comments? Okay.
Dr. Parrish, if you could speak
Yep.
to the enrollment
We're gonna
report.
move on to the enrollment.
Moving on to the enrollment, and this enrollment is again as of May 2nd. The enrollment is monitored on a weekly basis. And I did review particularly the kindergarten enrollment last year, to the point that Ms. Kelly was making earlier in reference to a surge in registrations that take place over the summer. So based on the May 2nd report, there were 221 fewer students who were enrolled in grades K through 5 than what we had in the projection. During the 2021 school year, kindergarten enrollment increased by over 200 students between the month of May and September. So it went from 487 to 724 respectively. Over the last week, we've seen, even though this again was based on the May 2nd report, and it reflected a reduction in 8 sections between May 2nd and May 9th, that has dropped to 5. So that's 1 week of change that we've seen, and we expect that to continue on throughout the course of the summer. But as of this report, there were 3 classes that were at the class size threshold: 1 kindergarten class at Riverfield, 1 grade 2 class at Dwight, and 1 grade 3 class at Jennings. There were 6 elementary schools who were projected to need fewer sections than were budgeted. Dwight, 1 less section in kindergarten. That is no longer the case as of May 9th. Jennings, as of May 2nd, was 1 section in kindergarten. Again, that is no longer the case as of May 9th. McKinley needed 3 fewer sections, 2 in kindergarten and 1 in grade 3. Mill Hill needed 1 fewer section in kindergarten, but again, as of May 9th, that is no longer the case. Riverfield needed 1 fewer section in kindergarten, as well as Stratfield. So again, as I mentioned previously, we'll continue to monitor this throughout the course of the summer and continue to identify, any reductions that might be needed, or on the flip side, any additions that might be needed based on the enrollment that takes place through registration.
Any questions, Mrs. Mascanelli?
Just first of all, thank you for this update. I just have to piggyback on what I just asked, which is I would ask perhaps second consideration be given to the placement of the Riverfield open choice students, because exactly what I said is now apparent on this sheet. The actual at Riverfield for the 2nd grade is 50, which means if that number changes, it should be 2 sections in the subsequent school year. And 2 open choice students change that, and that is something we have always strived to not have in terms of that type of budget implication. And so exactly the comment of 5 minutes ago appears to be true based on the current. Now, I absolutely know the data can change. So I guess my question then is, at what point does it have to be definitive of what grade the students are and where they get placed?
May 23rd, we actually asked for an extension. It was due in April, and because we wanted to present it to the board, they gave us an extension. But CES needs to know, because then they need to put out their applications to families.
Well, sure, and we need time to do the welcoming and to do the orientation and anything else that we need. But so I guess I just have to ask if that could be considered again, because according to this, that is a definitive additional section in the 2023-24 school year.
I think if we're comfortable with having much larger class sizes in grade 1, then I would follow the recommendation of the superintendent.
Except that it's not much larger. I mean, it's bringing 1 from 19 to 20.
Well,
Based on these actuals, that's not considerably larger, and it is a far more stable grade to put them into.
Here's what again, I'm just concerned about the variability in grade 1. Let's take a look. Dr. Parrish and I could take a look, because I'm just looking quickly at this. I'm wondering if there might be another grade in another school that would take the 2 students to get us to our 100 student commitment.
I guess to that I would say I would love the thought that they are being placed at Riverfield, but if their kindergarten number just went up to 3 sections, then that means the kindergarten numbers are low at Riverfield.
Yeah, but I think when you look at the historical over the kindergarten, that's even, I think I would, in general, we've tried to avoid kindergarten because of that variability. So I'm just like I said, I think we should take a look at some of the other potential grade levels that in schools that might have a greater history of stability, and other grades that have a greater history of stability, and think about, we can certainly keep Riverfield in mind, but we might want to think about a different, like I said, a different school and a different grade.
Mrs. Gerber.
Yeah, hi, thank you very much for this. Just one question. I know that McKinley overall tends to, the enrollment's really tricky to pin down because of the large number of rental units. And so you do have people coming in constantly. I mean, throughout the whole course of the entire school year, actually. But the kindergarten number is really, really low, and tremendously lower, like by over 20 than the lowest kindergarten year. And I was going through trying to see if I could find where we were, if we've gotten this information in the past. And I think we have some years, but maybe not. But I just was curious, is this kind of the same as it's been in past years, or is this low even for McKinley at this time?
So based on my limited knowledge of only 2 years, I would say it is definitely lower than what we've seen, at least what I've seen in the last 2 years. I think we did have a surge in kindergarten registrations this past year because a lot of families opted to hold their child out an additional year. So that definitely played into the larger numbers than what we may have experienced in previous years. But I can't confirm exactly, numerically what the difference is. I don't have that information here tonight, but it's something we can certainly look into.
I can try to speak to it with a little bit lengthier or a longer time period of knowledge on this. This number is low, but this is, when I first came into the district 7 years ago, this was probably the grade that, the school and grade that grew the most over time. And I think it speaks to efforts to communicate to families, to first-time families to register their students, on top of the changes in population, usually tied to rents and things like that. So I don't know if we're going to see 3 sections or 4 sections, but I would certainly expect that we'll get up there on this number.
Mr. Peterson.
Just as a random thought that occurred to me as Ms. Gerber was talking, I'm curious. I would be curious to see going forward whether this year would be an anomaly in terms of churn in rental units because of higher rental prices across the board. So I don't know if it's a long-term trend, but it would be an interesting thing to keep on the back of your heads.
Any other questions on enrollment? Thank you, Dr. Parrish.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to committee liaison reports. Mr. Asa.
So just an update from facilities. We had Mr. Wendt, the Director of Planning and Zoning, come to our last meeting, and it was very helpful. I will share with the board. I'm just waiting for him to send me the revised one of the spreadsheets that showed the list of all of the units in town of 10 units or more, broken down by 830G, as well as the town's policy for having 10% over a certain number of units set aside as affordable based on calculations. But ultimately, what it did show was that the average student per unit was overall was around 0.15, but when you looked at the 830G and the 10%, it was actually closer to about half that. And we spoke about development in certain sides of town and areas of town, and how that falls in. So it was an interesting exercise. And again, I'll share that data with the full board soon. We talked about the waterfall and got an update. I was not able to be present at the last capital planning workshop. Mrs. Vitale was there. Mr. Papa George was there. So they updated us. And the phase 1 air conditioning project is going to the RTM committee, as is the Fitz rooftop unit on Monday. The Fitz unit has to go back. I think, correct me if I'm wrong. The Fitz unit has to go back to the BOF for a procedural
it
vote.
accidentally got left off the last Board of Finance agenda, so it's going to be the RTM committees are actually going to hear the Fitz House before the Board of Finance. The Board of Finance will hear it. at the
Board of
quarterly.
Finance will meet and have a vote prior to the RTM vote. So hopefully everything will go through. I had put on the agenda just an overview of, how fields are opened and prepped and how contracts are awarded. We had a couple members of the public come and speak to some concerns that they had. And this is something that I think the Facilities Committee is going to stay in close contact with Mr. Papa George moving forward. And in any way that we can assist and give feedback, we will. And then we also briefly touched on some emergency repairs in the district, but nothing. Mr. Papa George at a future meeting will bring us up to date on a couple issues, but nothing glaring or anything that's going to be a major budgetary impact. But we'll see where that goes.
Mrs. Maxinelli?
Just two quick things from Parks and Rec. First, hopefully everybody is aware that the Roger Ludlow Middle School turf field, which comes under the town budgeting, not the Board of Ed budgeting, which we got a presentation on, I believe it was in 2019, is now finally up for a vote to the RTM. Very, very hopeful that will be passed. Because again, that'll certainly be of a benefit to Fairfield Public School students. And then secondly, just something to put on your calendar for those of you looking forward to Father's Day that just happened to fall on that day, that they are, I gotta say this right, not Parks and Rec, a Barks and Rec event has been approved for the center of town from 11 to 4 for people to bring their puppies. And they have an absolutely astounding number of events and activities for people to do. I know Mr. Asa will be there. Maybe you can bring along your decrepit puppy there, Mr. Peterson. And but it really does sound like a neat event to have right at the end of the school year. So again, that's June 19th from 11 to 4.
A point of personal privilege. My dog is only 13 and a half years old, and she is very spry.
Ms. Kelly?
There was a Board of Health meeting yesterday. Some talk about the spike in the community, but no real concerns there from a Board of Ed standpoint. There was a little bit of dialogue about the daily emails, the email that went out about, I guess, was it in North Stratfield, about the cluster, and it was cluster, I don't know if that's the right word that we're using. And there was just more dialogue around, there are other districts not even sending emails anymore. Are we kind of on autopilot here, just with, well, we're just going to do this until the end of the year? And I think there was some just discussion, and not a lot of discussion, but just, are we going, like, hopefully there's plans for maybe, like, to discuss going forward in September, like, do we start fresh? Or, like, is this the new normal, kind of, on the communication as far as that's concerned? Other than that, there was a demonstration we got of a new technology that they're using for vision testing in the elementary schools that they approved. It was actually pretty cool, and will completely speed up the way that they are doing the testing. It was pretty cool. And the absolutely most important thing that came out of that meeting is that tomorrow is National School Nurses Day. So thank your school nurses tomorrow. And every day, but especially tomorrow.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. I'm just going to thank our school nurses right now. On behalf of the board, to all of our school nurses, pre-COVID, thank you. The last 2 years, I mean, I feel like I need to get down and just for just nonstop and being there for our community, for our kids, for the boo-boos, the tests, a friendly ear, a friendly face. We are so incredibly thankful and lucky to have you, and we hope that you will get a nice break this summer, because you definitely deserve it. I do not have any committee reports. Ms. Gerber.
Yeah, just really quickly in Mill Hill. there was a meeting just to kind of go over a few approvals, some change orders, but things are moving along nicely with that now that the weather has improved. There's some landscaping, paving going on, and the small amount of interior work that needs to be done will be done once school ends, still with the goal of being completely complete by the start of the 22-23 school year.
Thank you. I attended the Board of Finance meeting. Mr. Peterson and I were tag teaming. Being that I was in the capital planning working group, I figured it would be better that I attended that meeting, being that I was well versed in the projects that were up for approval. As Mr. Asa reported, the Board of Finance unanimously approved phase 1 of the HVAC project moving forward. There were concerns just moving forward from just a bonding capacity for Board of Ed projects that we will need to take another look at that. The work will begin in the Facilities Committee, but just to prepare the board for looking at, making sure that we can move forward with everything that we want to move forward, and based on the 12.5 million the town has given us per year potentially in bonding, it may be difficult to follow our current timeline. But Mr. Papa George is working on cash flow for each projects and breaking that down over the course of the next 10 years and how that impacts the schedule. The working group will be meeting again to look at the next 4 years of the town's capital planning, and the Board of Ed capital projects will be planning holistically for, instead of going town, looking at, balancing per year potentially, which we haven't really done in the past, to make sure that we can move our project forward without, standing up town projects. And that didn't come out very eloquently, but I think that you got the gist of it. Any other committee reports? Okay. Moving on to open board comment. Ms. Guernsey.
Just a quick and enthusiastic congratulations to the Fairfield Woods Middle School Chamber Choir. They were invited to perform last Friday at Fenway Park for the Boston Red Sox Los Angeles Angels game, and they sang an absolutely beautiful 4-part harmony rendition of the national anthem. I had the honor to be there, and I think it's just another fantastic opportunity for our music students in Fairfield Public Schools. So thank you to all of the music teachers that made this possible, Ms. Frawley, and the coordinators that made this happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Asa.
Being that last week was Teacher Appreciation Week, I just wanted to shout out to not only all the teachers, but all of the staff in our district. Thank you for everything you do for our kids, for our families. I truly appreciate it, and I think everybody at this table does too. So thank you from the bottom of my heart to all of our staff and teachers.
Thank you, Mr. Asa. I think that we all agree with that. Well said. Anybody else? Okay, moving on to public comment. Any members of the public? Invite you to come forward. Seeing none, motion to adjourn. Mr. Peterson, seconded by Mr. Asa. All in favor? Motion carries 8-0. We are adjourned. Thank you.